Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, my lord?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, and children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. While you rested in your cradle of power, you were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. Now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we will have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all. You forbear me. Captain Honor, I do not know what strength is like that. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people failed. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.
What's up, guys? Welcome to The Narrative, also known as the Solo Alpha Show, for approximately 43 minutes as soon as my internet ends up going out again within the next 8 minutes, probably, if it matches last week. I have PTSD from last week if you can't understand that or figure that out. But Alpha did a great job last week, and it ended up kind of working out. My PSYOP worked out because, you see, since Alpha and Brad and Josh decided to start doing a midnight Eastern show on Sunday night, I try to give them some breathing room. I try not to go 4 hours. So I was like, 2 hours is not enough to then give Alpha an hour before his other show. If I PSYOP him for 43 minutes, I can get him for like an hour and a half on the first one and then 2.25 on the second one to do a 4-hour show and still give myself time to ramble solo. So it's best of all worlds, I think. We're doing episode 53, The Golden Age, Year 1, Part 2, which is a very succinct title, as befits this show. And the Maduro and Venezuela narrative is dominating the war of stories right now. And so we're still going to do our show. We're still going to talk about sort of 2025 and how has the first year of the Golden Age gone, especially from the perspective of narrative on some specific theaters. Some of those theaters, for anybody who read the article a week ago on Burning Bright, include the administrative state, the globalist hegemon, the cartels, a few different theaters. I was saying to Alpha before the show, almost all of those theaters are somehow wrapped up or adjacent to this Maduro and Venezuela narrative. So we know everybody's been talking about it all day. Everyone's jonesing for it. And it does work with a lot of the theaters tonight. So we're going to talk about that as much as we want. Then we're going to get into some of these theaters and kind of go step by step of, I was finding as I wrote that article, as I said last week, that some of the perception of a lack of forward motion in 2025, I think starts to dissipate when you step away from the macro, ironically, even though I'm a macro-minded person, and you focus theater good over here and did good over here. And, we'll talk about some of that. But before we do, I will introduce our sponsors for tonight's show, beginning with Old Faithful himself and his incredible pillows, the Pillow Kingdom Lord and Savior, Mike Lindell.
I'm excited to announce that we're having our biggest Made in America sale ever. We just put huge discounts on products made right here in the USA. My Pillow bed pillows, body pillows, go anywhere pillows, bolster pillows, all made with my patented adjustable fill. Mattresses, mattress toppers, mattress pads, adjustable bed frames, mattress foundations, and so much more. All made right here in the USA. And now we're expanding our USA products beyond just quality sleep. Like the cross I wear every day, now available in both men's and women's. We even have USA-made socks. And are you tired of being tired? Try our new health beverage, Rev 7. Or how about my coffee, the greatest coffee ever. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to get deep discounts on all these products. Plus, for a limited time, your order ships absolutely free.
Many things in my household are my pillow, including the bed my wife and I sleep on, and the pillows on that bed. So we are living and sleeping the lifestyle of Mike Lindell. And I appreciate him asking if I'm tired of being tired, because I am. Got about 3 hours of sleep. It's going to be a big week for me, though. And again, filibustering time does not count as guest time. I just like to see the existential dread backstage on my guest's face, and it's working. This might be a big week for me. I have been trying to plan to get a haircut for a month, and I think this is going to be the week. We're going to figure it out. Me and the missus, we're going to figure out how to get me over there. I might just abandon the family. I might, file for divorce, whatever it takes to get me to get a haircut. And I may attempt to trim my beard. Although my beard products have done a good job, I'm not going to shave my beard, but I may try to make myself slightly more approachable. But we'll see. We'll see what the audience thinks. Third hour of the show is going to be you guys, of course. Rants, boosts, whatever you want to send over. We'll shoot the shit, and I'll send you into Q After Hours after that. But I guess I'll bring him on, my guest Alpha, and I bet my internet will go out soon after this, which will confirm the conspiracy of whatever you've been up to.
Well, there's no worries if the internet goes out. I have plenty of extra stuff to bring in here, a whole host of things to take advantage of. But no, thank you for having me back. And the psyop, I mean, that was very, I'm impressed. Very impressed.
They say a magician never reveals his tricks, but that's the old style of narrative in the magic realm. And I feel like the new style is just saying it outright and seeing if people think you're still playing a trick on them. You just keep the op going. You go so far into the op that you invert yourself. And I think that's kind of what I'm going for.
Oh, yeah. The perfect psyop is when the person that orchestrated it doesn't realize they're now part of their own psyop.
I like that. The Ouroboros, one of my favorite. It's the Burning Bright drinking game. That's certainly one of the, I think it might have supplanted bicameral from the early Badlands days. I don't say that a whole lot these days, but we might tonight. And I had mentioned in the intro there, first of all, you did a great job last week solo hosting. And then we had a really good conversation that wasn't really planned. We kind of did an extended intro that I think worked really well to set the stage. And I think the info war, or the war of stories, as I call it, if ever there was a narrative that I think skeptics of my approach, I should frame this differently. Everyone in this audience understands that there's an info war, and they understand narratives are part of that, right? But when I talk about the war of stories, I am talking about the stories that those narratives take the form of, right? Like, there's a bit of a difference between a narrative and a story. And I think a lot of people, even that follow info war, fifth generation warfare, they know that information is being battled over and translated in different ways. But I think sometimes they underestimate how much story crafting goes into these narrative deployments and these narrative counters. Some may think there's no difference there, but I think there is a difference, even if they're true stories, true or false, between storytelling and narrative. And just my overwhelming feeling coming out of today, I'll say from the jump, as I watched a lot of Chris and John's show last night, and like many at Badlands, I am not pretending to be able to tell you guys what is actually going on, especially in a theater like this. I have my ideas from a narrative perspective that we'll talk about tonight, but my macro takeaway was everyone is just confused enough to make me a little happy, because they understand that a lot of people are telling stories about what's going on in Venezuela, including Donald Trump. And some of those stories don't make a whole lot of sense based on other stories being told. But I wonder what your kind of major takeaways on a narrative level is from this Venezuela madness.
I didn't get to watch John and Chris last night. But as you would imagine, my take's a little bit different at times with things. So, of course, my phone would blow up with, I can't believe John said this. And with other people saying, why don't you get on board with John? Right. So it's like,
right.
This is happening. But it did get me thinking this morning. And I was like, oh, this would be something great to bring up on the show. I'm a father of more than one kid. And,
people just pop them out.
We do. We're trying to follow that Russian model right now.
Yep.
And, I have, my oldest, 25 will be 26 in February. And my youngest, 2.5, right? Big spectrum of all girls and one boy. But I started thinking, BB, did I, as a young father, decide at age 6, I'm going to tell my first little girl, Santa Claus doesn't exist?
Right.
No, there was no timestamp. And then when I did decide to finally tell her, that I say, okay, 7 years old, kids in school, I don't want her to get made fun of, so I'm telling her now. So my next daughter, I'm going to tell her when she hits 7 years old, 1 week and 1 day. No, it didn't work out like that either. Every single one of my kids were approached in a different way to enlighten them on the same story. But because they're all so different, maturity levels different, emotional levels different, I had to craft my way of explaining this in a way that they could digest it, not interpret it as, well, my dad's been lying to me my whole life. There's a lot that goes into that simple little story. And I kind of look at what's going on right now like that. There's so many different versions of humanity. Different age groups, different experiences, different religions, no religions, all different. But everybody at the end of this has to buy off on a narrative, not just because it's truthful, because that's the easy way to explain it, but because it's believable. The truth isn't always believable.
Yeah, that's very true.
And I think watching President Trump and others, I subscribe to the Sovereign Alliance as well. Watching everybody kind of orchestrate this shows me this is probably the most complicated thing that has ever happened on Earth when it comes to storytelling.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I think it's good framing. It gets us into some good framing on this. Because again, I want to open with saying we don't know what's actually going on. We might believe, some of us might know more than others or have different contacts or done different research. Somebody like you has a lot of military knowledge and just that you've picked up over the years, even before the info war, of how these theaters work, some of the background of these theaters, our own Ghost. He's got controversial ideas, but for any of the people that think Ghost just like who don't subscribe to his framing of things, multipolarity, and he's very sovereign alliance minded as well, but he focuses on some different theaters usually than I do, including Venezuela. Him and Chris have really been focused on Venezuela for a couple of years now. And whatever you think of Ghost's end conclusions, he's got a vast wealth of knowledge in terms of the histories of these regions and specifically how these regimes have operated in and out of these regions. And I think it's strange, but I mean, I agree with you in terms of narrative translation is a way I talk about this sometimes, of trying to put myself in the shoes of patriots, not knowing what they know, but believing that there are white hat patriots, that Donald Trump is among them and is kind of the leader of that sovereign arm, the most important one being the US because of our power projection capabilities. And by the way, not just military power projection, I also think America has the strongest cultural and narrative power projection capabilities because we're kind of the culture setter of the West, right? So it's sort of like whatever story on a given world event really seizes the American zeitgeist is largely going to dominate the Western world. Maybe not Russia, maybe not China, but that's kind of going to become the dominant narrative. So they wield an incredible amount of power. We wield a lot of power as a culture. But I think this is an extremely complicated narrative, and it's not just that I think patriots are trying to translate whatever's actually going on in a way people will get to the same endpoint that you're kind of describing. But this is where I don't think I'm disagreeing with Q rhetoric, but some people think I do in terms of patriot control. I do think that there's a lot of patriot control over the game board, but it's clear that at least on a narrative level, there are counter narratives being deployed constantly at the narratives that Trump and team are deploying. And one of the things we really focus on a lot at Badlands, especially on DPH, has been counter narratives that are being dressed up as MAGA narratives. This Venezuela one, like I find those easy to spot when they're Russia or something. That's my framing, right? I think Putin and Trump know what's going on and everything. So when I see a MAGA voice just going super hard in the paint, anti-Russia, anti-Putin, anti-this, anti-that, it's kind of an easy reverse indicator for me personally. But I think that there's a lot of earnest MAGA people that do that with some other theaters. And I put a tweet. Maybe I actually just wrote this privately, but I meant to put it out as a tweet. One thing I said today, just to kind of spark a conversation, is a lot of people, whether they're Q people, Badlands people, Infowar people, they will say something like, Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping are working together against the globalist regime. I forget the exact wording, but the infamous drop. And they'll post that unironically. And then they'll repeat a Trump quote about Venezuela or pick your country in South America and essentially say something to the effect of Trump is kicking the Russians and the Chinese out of this theater. What a masterstroke, right? Now, that could be true. That could be what we're watching. But if you're saying both of those takes, you've got to understand that on some level, those are contradictory takes, since you're like, you're missing something. I'm not saying I know what that something is, but if you're alleging that Trump is doing things to disrupt Putin and Xi, while all your other tweets are about how Trump, Putin, and Xi are working together to destabilize the global regime, that's one of the many reasons I think why this type of situation is so complicated. There's so many players involved and so many narratives involved.
I mean, it's true. And it's a lot of it in part is because if you had to preface every post or article, or here's my foundational understanding, right? Because you're imagining that this particular post or this particular article is going to be read by someone who has zero knowledge of anything you've ever said before. So if they just go into the article with you explaining a certain circumstance, but they don't know historically how you feel about it, what you've been tracking, when you talk about China, are you talking about Xi, or are you talking about the CCP, or are you talking, and it would be difficult to try to put that at the beginning of every post, because you would never get to the post. We would all be worn out. But at the same time, I haven't gotten to go there myself, but I've been wanting to go for a couple of reasons. There's a Country Fried, Zach Brown band did a concert in Vegas at that round dome thing. I think it's called the
Sphere. Yeah.
Sphere. And when I started looking into it, I came across a bunch of other conspiratorial type things surrounding it. But one of the things that I realized is when you look at the way this thing's designed, right? You have sections of the auditorium or the seating where people are, but one group, that center group has a certain perspective, and then the one way off this way has a different perspective. This way, the balcony, close, back, etc. You guys get the point I'm making. So when you go into the technology of designing this experience, you can't just design it for that group that's right there in the front, because nobody would, once the word got out that the rest of those seats suck, nobody would go. The business would collapse. So you have to design this movie, this video, this experience, that everybody that has a different perspective still comes away with an experience that they understood and enjoyed. And when we see these things that are unfolding before us, that's what it is. Different experience levels, different knowledge bases, different education, all our backgrounds. It makes it even more complicated to what's happening. And so, when I got to spend 14 years of my life writing stories, not as a great author like this guy. I hope you guys are supporting the work that he's doing.
Stories about ninjas exclusively.
but taking people's stories and documenting them in a thing we call police reports. Mm-hmm. Now, some of those stories were fake, some exaggerated, some completely honest. But here's what I realized, bro, to go to the point of what you said. When I see people writing this on this perspective, but from this perspective, they're saying this about, Putin or Xi, whoever. In every story, or the majority, I won't say every, but in the majority of every story I wrote as a cop, there's four people. There's your suspect, there's your witness, there's your victim, right? And then there's the person that, has to document this. Now, the person documenting it, sometimes you find them in the story, sometimes you don't. But all these people, assuming that, we'll use like a homicide, right? All these people were involved in some sort of fashion. So you have the story from the victim, you have the story from the witness's perspective, you have the suspect or the defendant, the perpetrator, right? That's either going to deny it, is either going to admit to it, and then the other person that puts this all together. And so when I look at what's going on in, this world, I look at people when they come out, let's just say, I think we're both on the same kind of page when it comes to Russia, Putin bad, Putin bad, Putin bad. Well, then if I see this, I got to label this person as something, so I understand where to put them in my sphere of my operation. Are they a victim? Somebody who has bought off on mainstream narrative or alt narrative or something? Are they a victim of information? Because if that's the case, they don't represent a threat to me.
Yeah.
Are they the perpetrator? Are they the one, the puppet, pulling the strings for mainstream media or alt media? Because that's the highest level threat that exists. Or is this person a witness? They're not writing something, but I see that they're always present. I see that they're in these spaces. I see they watch these podcasts. They don't ever let you know where they stand. They don't let you know what they believe, but they're always present for these stories. And we have to craft our work in a way that addresses all of those, addresses the person that's been victimized. They got to learn the truth. We have to be able to destroy the ability for the suspect to push their agenda. And we also have to make sure that we're providing the witness enough information that when they do decide, they're not falling for the lie, but they're engaged in the truth.
That's all very well said, and I think it it actually gives me a bit of an in to, because I do agree with you in terms of, I often call those people like earnest doomers. I say they're people who do believe, like they are genuinely trying to discover the truth, but they're locked into paradigm framing. And I use that in my writing sometimes. By that I mean, there are people who I think are otherwise discerning and intelligent people who, when presented with media narrative, can find holes in it. They can recognize propaganda and everything. But the reason I use the word paradigm there, that word gets overused, like many of them. But when you think paradigm, you should be thinking big, right? You could argue that paradigm is another word for reality. That would probably be the framing somebody like I would use. Somebody like Chris Paul would probably favor something like that too. Basically, the idea is the paradigm is the agreed upon macro story onto which all other stories are being built. The American paradigm, right? It was Manifest Destiny at one point. Paradigms are never universal. They're never something that everybody in a society agrees on at once. But I think that earnest doomers get locked into paradigms because they don't even think to question some of their baseline assumptions. To your point about Russia, let's use that as an example. I've met a lot of based MAGA people who are, otherwise pretty smart, discerning people. Any current narrative comes out in the political realm, especially in the West, probably agree with 90% of what they say. They see through media bullshit. They know that we've been fed lies, etc. But they don't even think to question, hold up, how far back does this programming go? And I mean literally timeline-wise. And that was, for me, one of the big revelations to me of doing the Righteous Russia series was reading about the similarities between the regime change ops that were forwarded against Russia in the early 20th century and a lot of stuff we've seen around the world, a lot of stuff in South America that we facilitated in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and a lot of stuff in Europe and on Russia's borders in the last 20 or 30 years. And that's eye-opening because you kind of recognize if you are not just born into a paradigm that has been newly formed, but if you're born into a paradigm that has set Russia as just de facto potential enemy of the United States 40 years before you were born, or 80 years before you were born, that's a multi-generation entrenched paradigm that you're just in as a framing, right? It's like being born into the framing that America is good. And I'm not saying it's not. There can be good framings you're born into. You could be born into a 10th generation Christian family and it's good. You're raised by them but you were kind of raised in that paradigm. You didn't discover that paradigm on your own. I think the same thing works in reverse. And I think the reason it's so subversive, and I think to tie this into the Maduro-Venezuela situation, I don't know if Maduro is a member of what I would call the Sovereign Alliance. A couple of years ago, I would have said no, but I hadn't done a lot of research on it. After a lot of conversations with Ghost, he started getting me on board. For a while, I was thinking, I think he's an our boy, the thing Chris Niall used to describe as Zelensky, people that Trump has leveraged, but that are not, Sovereign Alliance. They're just being leveraged. Whether or not you believe Maduro is one of those guys, your framing of when you mentioned Putin and Russia and then Xi and China, I think my frustration, even in the info war, is that I see no one outside of Badlands even floating the idea that Maduro and Venezuela might not be the same thing. And it's like, it might be the same thing, right? Maybe he was the one responsible for all this stuff. But I would suggest that a lot of the reverse indicators a lot of this audience uses to put Putin in a potential white hat camp, such as George Soros naming him a threat to democracy, globalist NGOs going against him, globalist organizations giving Nobel Peace Prizes to people who run against Vladimir Putin, that sort of template. They'll use all of those and be like, well, yeah, Putin is separate from this other communist stuff. A lot of that stuff is going on with some of these leaders in South America too, and they'll just be like, yeah, Trump said he's bad, then he's bad. It's like, well, he said the same thing about Xi Jinping and about Vladimir Putin, but since a drop suggested that that's not the case, now you believe you believe that that's the case. So that's kind of my framing of where some frustration comes in. Ultimately, I think it's good that there's this confusion going on. Hopefully it's going to force people to think about these things. Why do you believe this about this player and that player? But I don't know if that makes sense, but that can, I find that for some reason, and I'll credit your race, and I'll say, usually I say the racist undertone thing is overstated and liberals are retarded by calling everybody racist. But it's kind of funny that like a lot of MAGA is pretty okay with believing that the Russians are secretly helping us. But when you're like, what about the Venezuelans? It's like, no.
Nah.
Couldn't be.
No. It's true. So here's a little tip that I'll give to the audience, because I consider this audience not normies. These are people that I consider you guys all advanced digital soldiers. That's how I see all you guys in the audience. Don't find yourself so focused on the action. Be more focused on the result. And the reason being, a lot of times that action might not be for your targeted group. It may be for another group. It may be for the enemy. It may be for the normies. Who knows? But the result is something that affects all groups, whether it was targeted or not. So the result is something that we all have a shared consequence or benefit from. So focus on that. So is Maduro someone that's a good guy or is he a bad guy? We want to know because we're curious human beings, and in a position like with us, BB, that helps us kind of articulate the next step in the model of what we're looking at. So yeah, there's the importance for us in that aspect. But for, the general viewer, the person that's just trying not to get, lost in the chaos of what's going on, look at the results of things that are happening, whether Maduro's good or bad. If he comes out and he starts laying out names involved with the election, net positive for all.
Yeah. Okay? Silly story, but good end results.
100%. And, there's a lot to it. Do I think, here's to answer your question that you started with, what do I think on it? I think that when Maduro entered this picture, he was placed in that position by an entity not good, whatever it may be, whether we want to say it was the cartels, the globalists, deep state. I think his obtaining of that position was facilitated by bad intentions and bad people. I think somewhere along that line, and if you watch his behavior and some of the things he did, those are things that are just not consistent with the globalist plan. And so then you have to ask, has he defected? Or has someone grabbed him by the collar and says, these are your options. Door number one, which you don't like, or door number two, where you at least survive and get some resemblance of a life. And I think that is a door that he has chosen. I think that probably happened, longer than we think. I don't think that this was a recent development. I don't. And, for me, how do I come to these conclusions? Some of it's by the research, articles like BB's and others that I read and study. But there's this other thing that I can't put on paper and I can't measure it. And it's what kept me alive as a cop. It's what kept me alive as a Marine. It's something that 2/3 of my life has kept me alive. So I'm not going to discount it. And it's just this ability to feel the atmosphere of what's going on and realize I got to take a step to the right or I got to take a step to the left. I don't know why. I just know I have to, because if I stay where I'm at, I'm going to get hurt. And that's never failed me. And so I've been able to apply that concept through a new learning curve, because this is a different battlefield. But I've been able to kind of apply that concept to realizing I need to step in this direction here. And a lot of times what I found myself, BB, is I'll have a certain take on somebody and someone else that I know is a good person. I know they don't have, bad intentions. They have a different take. And we're going down two different paths on this take. But eventually things unfold that we were going like this. And then all of a sudden I see us starting coming back like this. So it was two different routes that brought us to the same fork in the road or endpoint. And so what I would tell people is don't panic if you see people you like not in agreement. There's a purpose for that. My individual experience in research could be because whether I know it consciously or subconsciously, I may be focused on a certain targeted group of an audience. BB may have a different one. And so his pathway towards getting to the same endpoint in this mission is going to look different. And, it gets complicated when you have bleed over audiences and things like that. But at the end of the day, for me personally, I look at, do these people that I'm working with or these people that I'm trying to work for, is our mission the same? And if the end goal is the same, then all right, then we argue, we have discord, and we figure it out. And it's the people who are watching and viewing to take the onus and responsibility to be like, damn, I agree with Alpha. I agree with BB. I don't agree with either of them. And become involved. And this is the reason why. And I think this is the most important thing. If there's anything you guys ever take away from me that matters, it's this. The whole point of this operation, of what's going on, is to make us unsteerable. That's it. Because a population that can't be emotionally manipulated, can't be politically tricked, a population that has developed a new ethic of understanding what's going on, you become unsteerable. And why is that the goal? Because at that point, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. You don't fall for anything. And that's what prevents us from being hijacked into false flags that try to create some type of, criminal response or kinetic response, something that hurts us and gives them what they want. It's the ability when they can no longer steer us. That's the goal. Now, here's the catch to that, right? This is where I'm going to, well, hold on. It sounds like you're contradicting yourself now.
I do it every day.
We're not there yet. We're not a population that's unsteerable yet. If we were to become unsteerable now with the lack of knowledge that we have, some people believe, elections are still the way. Some people don't. There's so much indifference in the main things that matter that becoming unsteerable right now, we would collapse internally. So there's a point where we don't all have to agree on the same thing. We just got to recognize what it is that's trying to get us to agree on the same thing, so that when we become unsteerable, we're not going to go into self-destructive behavior either. And I think that's what all this is kind of bringing us to a point in. And I think this Venezuela thing, man, it covers a lot of those categories that you have brought up, man.
Yeah, and that's well said. And I think ultimately I do, I sometimes, even when I do get frustrated by narratives I see, and by that I mean I rarely get frustrated at narratives being disseminated top down, narratives that are coming out of either avowed globalist sort of regime, call it deep state if you want, the enemy. When I see enemy narrative that's very clearly demarcated, it doesn't bother me. I actually use that more often than patriot narrative, because I consider it, to use kind of military ideology, I would consider that basically recon. I'm sure there's like active plan formation of your plans, and then there's reactive or proactive reconnaissance. Like, what is reconnaissance about? It's about trying to figure out what the enemy is doing, right? And you've got specialists that specialize in that, and then you've got guys that don't focus on recon, and they focus on, like, here's what we're doing regardless of what's going on over there. Those forward scouts are going to come back and give us the recon. We may then shift what we're doing. So when I see enemy narrative that's like the Atlantic, the New York Times, CNN, I'm like, okay, this is useful. This is useful information, because these are the narratives that they are trying to steer us into something. So my job, I think, or a job I've taken on, is what, just like you said, in a positive direction, where are we trying to get to? Where are we trying to get to as a movement? You should also apply that to enemy narrative framing and say, it's not about, this might sound strange, but to me, for this community, for this audience, you mentioned that their IQ and just kind of like their experience in the info war, and that is real. I think we should challenge ourselves to stop just pointing out the lies in enemy narrative, because that's like a prerequisite to even knowing an info war is happening, right? I'm not saying it's useless to say that this is a lie or that's a lie, because it might lead you to more useful information. But if you guys are trying to like wake up the normies by pointing out inconsistencies in media narratives, that's what the entire influencer sphere, some of them earnest, some of them not, who found out it makes a lot of money, they do that. They're like, this article is lying about this, and that's not how many murders were in DC this year, it was this many. Like, I think this audience has kind of accelerated beyond that. I think a lot of the Q audience should have accelerated beyond that. I'm not saying all of them have.
What you're describing is that's maintaining a defensive posture, and you don't win a war like that.
That's a good way to put it. Exactly. It's reactive rather than proactive. And now, I've said last week on the show, we were talking about counter-striking. You might react correctly, and it's good to develop reactions. You know, reacting isn't always bad. Reflexes are reactions. You want to develop good reactions, so you know when you're being lied to. But like I'm saying, just for a pro fighter or like for a warrior, that's a prerequisite to be on the battlefield. If you're still working on that at a certain level, then you haven't progressed. So what does proactive info warring look like? And to me, it looks like I'm looking at a New York Times headline, and I'm noticing, like we all notice in this community, 4 a.m. talking points, etc., there is large-scale coordination in enemy messaging, right? So for me, I try to front run that and say, where is this narrative trying to lead me in the future? And just directionally, it's a pretty good way to operate, because then when something else comes out and you're like, that's related to the stuff you guys were putting out a month ago. And to tie this back into Maduro and Venezuela, I think it is a fascinating example, because there's like dueling narratives. We're used to dueling narratives as a binary, but I think this is like a Russian nesting doll, matryoshka dueling narratives going on here. I like your framing, though, about Maduro. And Ghost and I did a whole episode of the narrative months ago about the Sovereign Alliance, of course, we usually do. But we did a section on Maduro, and I basically said, I have Maduro placed into the our boy camp, which is pretty close to how you framed it. When I say our boy, I mean Zelensky. I put him in that camp. I put Maduro in that camp, or I did. Guys that I'm like, well, I know who put you in power, and I'm not into them. They're pretty globalist regime. But then I look at the net effects of your impact on the people who put you into power. And if it hasn't been very good, you got to start questioning those things. Ghost did a good job with Maduro of getting me way closer to, I don't know, man. He might have walked through that door more willingly than we think. We're never going to know the answers to these things, but the way you framed it, I think, is a healthy way to frame this. That's why you were saying end results. In my writing, I often say it's the net effects refrain. We're going to try to figure out what are the net effects of this macro story that Trump is telling the American people, because I think that's the most important one to focus on. But even before that, what have been the net effects of Maduro on the globalist regime and on the cartels specifically? I saw Chris Paul point out last night, Chris and John point out last night, these stories against Maduro from several months ago of like, man, he released all these prisoners, he released all these cartel prisoners, and they go, well, who put them in prison, right? It was like, Maduro put them in prison. His Justice Department put them in prison. A lot of cartel regime people wanted him out. The easiest, cleanest reverse indicator of, at the very least, either Sovereign Alliance guy or, to Alpha's earlier point, a guy who took a deal somewhere along the line, is that the globalist regime has been writing hit pieces on Nicolas Maduro as long as Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping. And they went one step further, and I think one of the ultimate reverse indicators for the Sovereign Alliance is propping up NGO-funded globalist opposition candidates to run against these dictators. And Marina Corina Machado, or as Chris would call her, Hakuna Matata, I believe, is the latest one. Like, if you still believe that Hakuna Matata smuggled herself via rowboat in the dark of night over to the Netherlands or wherever it was so she could collect a globalist award that is usually the thing they give somebody right before they kick off the kinetic phase of a color revolution and install that person as the leader of a nation, then I don't know what to tell you. And that is why, a clip they played last night, a clip many of us saw, to me, wherever you fall on Nicolas Maduro, I think the biggest single statement, single and signal statement from Donald Trump in the last 24 hours has been immediately and emphatically shutting down the idea of Marina Corina Machado becoming the leader of Venezuela. I'm not saying it's conclusive on the Maduro side, but I think it is absolutely conclusive on her side of the equation. And maybe what we saw here was a little bit of Trump interrupt, as the Q refrain would say, the captain steered us into the path of the torpedo before it could arm itself. That's what I think went on here on some level. How much of it is real and how much of it's narrative, I don't know.
One of the things that we talked about last week and this Venezuela Maduro thing showed real time one of the conversations we had, or it might have been that solo piece, I think, or both. And it's, do I anticipate there's going to be election conversation or election intel that comes out of this publicly or not? I do believe that's going to be a result we're going to see. But let's talk about a net benefit we've already experienced because of this. One of the things that I talked about is before we get into the final declassification stage of things, the audience, people need to know who they can turn to, who they can trust. And what's one thing Maduro has exposed in the last 48 hours like crazy? Because I see people calling him out. People are like, you're defending a dictator?
Yeah.
like hold on, you guys are saying like no kings, but you're defending this guy, and it's making people kind of step back and be like bro, like I don't like Trump and I don't like these MAGA people, but this don't make no damn sense. And it's impacting their credibility.
Yeah.
It's making people kind of take reservation to be like, well, what's going on here? Because I know that guy's not bad. You see all these videos, and I'm sure some of them are scripted, but you see some that are definitely, legit, of Venezuelan people, whether here in the stateside or from Venezuela themselves, that are coming out and saying, y'all are very lucky to even have these conversations in America, because we're finally going to get some room to breathe. Like, we're not out of the fight. There's still a lot of corruption that exists here, but we're not out of the fight. And so I think one of the biggest benefits that we've had right now are a lot of people are exposing themselves. There's some people out there that took a position of, Maduro was put into power because, he's a Jew, right? That background that comes back, from his grandparents. Now you have people that are saying, Trump's removed him from power because he's doing BB's bidding. And it's just like, well, hold on. Just last year, you said that the reason he was there is because he's part of this group. But now it's just like, pick a fight. And what does it do? It exposes that these people don't even have an understanding of their own script. They get these talking points, they fire it out. And that's one of the things that people need to be aware of. There is a lot going on here. Are there facts? Was there an Iranian oil ratio relationship between Venezuela and Iran? Yeah, it was. It was like 2-to-1 on barrels, and Venezuela couldn't keep up with that demand. It fell by the wayside, made them dependent on some things. Do we know that, Russia had installed some weapons and missiles and things like that in Venezuela? Yeah, that's a fact. Do we know that there was an existing relationship between China and all that? Yeah, those things are facts. But then you gotta ask yourself, do you believe that there's a globalist deep state? And if the answer to that is yes, well, then you know who is orchestrating those things. And if you understand that they were orchestrating those things, and you believe in the concept of a sovereign alliance, that Putin's fighting for Russia, that Xi's fighting against the deep state in China, then you would understand that there is going to be a collaboration of all these people that brings that stuff and exposes it. America's going to make moves that Putin needs them to make because it's going to help him eradicate the deep state. Xi is going to need Trump to make moves that's going to help Xi eradicate the deep state. Just like there's times where people are like, why is Trump doing that? Is it a benefit for us, or is it a benefit that helps Chi or us. All this is, if you understand that the Sovereign Alliance's ultimate goal is to bring us to sovereignty, to get rid of the supernatural that exists, amongst all these governments, and that's the only way we're going to get there. And so I get frustrated, when I see people lose hope so fast, because I'm like, you're living off of the individual story rather than everything that's happened. And and maybe I'm wrong, I'll give it to you here, BB. But if people kept telling me, oh, Trump's doing this and it's going to be an endless war and it's going to be boots on the ground forever, and then it doesn't happen, I'm going to be like, okay, I'm going to check that memory, but because it got my blood pressure up, got me scared, I'm hugging the kids. And if that keeps happening in a course of a year, and it's never comes to what they're saying, and I just see that Trump has showed the ability to shoot down endless wars with strategic military interventions that last hours, I'm going to start thinking, this guy probably knows what he's doing when it comes to military strategy. And I think that's what Venezuela was, Yeah. One of the things, I was sent a clip, from last night's show, and this is me operating off of a clip. And here's something that I would offer to you, BB, and everybody that's watching. If we're going to look at this in the term of game theory and military strategy, then we have to stop looking at countries as countries. Yes. Venezuela is not Venezuela. Venezuela is what we call a FOB, forward operating base, for the globalists and the deep state. That when we start to look at these countries as strategic positioning by the globalist deep state, then if you're looking at this through military, strategy, then you start to realize, okay, this makes sense. Trump coming out with the American strategy that says we're going to focus on the Western Hemisphere. What is that? That's military strategy, hands down. That's saying we're the two most dangerous places that exist in the United States, our northern border and our southern border. And if Trump is making moves to secure those things, that's great. And then you would expect, Russia and China to do the same thing. Here's something that somebody sent me a clip, and this is from a person I completely am disappointed in the direction this person has gone. I think this person got compromised, but they did say something. I was like, I agree with that. Well, if President Trump went in there and snatched Maduro, then Putin should be able to go into Ukraine and snatch up Zelensky. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, well, we're all okay with that.
Like, I'm good with that. And guess what? Putin would have a good argument. Hey, bro, You did it. Why can't I? And Trump would be like, well, the EU needs to figure this out. NATO needs to figure this out. And the net benefit is all of us. You get two characters that are pulled out of the game that can't create any destruction.
Speaking of that, something I'll focus on more after I let you go before your next show is a long statement by Dmitry Medvedev out of Russia that says exactly that as part of it. He says, well, what's to stop us from going in and getting Zelensky in the same manner? So I often call Dmitry Medvedev the bad cop in the Russian narrative. He's usually the one who comes out and takes the hard line narrative stance. Like, we're going to bomb the US if they bomb us. And then the media's like, Russia threatens to bomb the US. And then you get Sergei Lavrov, that usually is the good cop, and comes out and says, no. My friend Dmitry said, if you bomb us, we'll bomb you. We didn't say we were going to bomb you. It creates the same headlines every single time. So now all the headlines that have just started popping up, and a shout out to my chat. We had, who the heck was it? I want to give credit to whoever forwarded this to me. Robert Underwood forwarded me that whole message. I hadn't seen it before then. But Medvedev's statements are blowing up because, no pun intended. Now the whole media apparatus is like, Russia is threatening to go in and take Zelensky. And he's like, no, I'm just saying, if we do what Trump is doing, it would be the same thing, and you could argue that we are more justified. He essentially laid out your argument. He goes one step further and says, which, let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, you got to drop that in the private.
He goes, it's a very long thing. And the problem is I was looking for it. If somebody has a link in chat to the full statement from Dmitry Medvedev, the Q&A on Twitter, on X, or on an article, I could only find it on Dmitry Medvedev's Telegram. He posted the whole thing because TASS did an interview with him and they quoted a few things from him. But then Medvedev posted his full answers to their interview, which I also thought was kind of interesting. Medvedev's like, here's what I actually said. So I'll just read aloud one more section from it. He says, now think of this statement from Medvedev through the Sovereign Alliance framing, as Alpha has been saying, and think of it through the lens of the narrative, that there is some sort of narrative translation going on here. In the wake, this was all in response to Maduro in Venezuela, by the way. It was Russia being asked about Trump's regime change operation. And he says one last thing. The capture of, say, neo-Nazi Merz, is currently the leader of Germany, by the way, so that's charged language. The capture of neo-Nazi Merz could be a fabulous twist in the plot of this campy soap opera. Few things can surprise us anymore. It wouldn't be entirely unrealistic either. Merz has done enough to be prosecuted even in Germany. Nobody would feel sorry for him, given that the folks in Germany are suffering for nothing. So, like, you've now got the Russians coming out and being like, when most in MAGA who are normie minded, I mean, would probably be like, the Russians are going to respond aggressively at what Trump is doing to Maduro. And they said, hey, we don't believe in regime change. But Medvedev literally then says, Trump has been remarkably consistent with his approach to international politics, and maybe we should just do the same thing with Zelensky, and maybe somebody should go get the German guy. That sounds Sovereign Alliance framing to me. Yeah.
Big time. Because here's the thing, and I saw a couple of people saying it in the chat. Well, Trump needs to go get Bibi next. Listen, Trump is never gonna do that to Bibi. I would imagine there's always gonna be some remnants of a very large group of Christian Zionists that would just lose it. They're not ready. We're not there yet. But Trump did set precedents, and Dmitry is capitalizing on that precedence. And so if there was another Middle Eastern country that we'd started to, we had established to the world, there's a very good working relationship here, and they found themselves in a position to where we don't want to go to war with Israel. We're just going to go snatch up this dude. And all of a sudden it happened. Well, then that's probably more realistic than expecting, Trump to do it. That ain't going to happen.
I totally agree with what you said, though, about, and Chris talks about this a lot. We need to, and we all need to check ourselves at times. We use nation states interchangeably with actions, narratives, etc. It's very difficult not to do that. But yeah, there's an absolute, and I guess to go to my earlier frustration at the beginning of this episode with some people in the info war, it's that I feel that they will play that game when it comes to countries they have decided are our allies or leaders. So they'll say, oh, I understand there's a difference between Putin and Soviets. Oh, I understand there's a difference between Xi Jinping and the CCP. But then you even try to float like, hey, I'm not saying I know what's going on with Maduro, but you are aware that the World Economic Forum, George Soros, and all of the people that you call the deep state have been actively fomenting a color revolution against him for the last 2 years. Like, you should probably stop and think about how that works into your model. And I find that a lot of people are just like, Venezuela bad, right? And it's like, well, yeah, I don't know if a country can be bad. And again, it's the framing that people get caught up in because we're used to looking at maps. Unfortunately, we get caught in this globalist framing that they want for us, is to say like, there's this country and this country is a monolith, and then there's this country. I like how you framed it as a staging ground because it absolutely is one. And one of the things in my notes, I haven't written the article yet, but on this whole Maduro stuff, one of the terms I kept thinking of was change event when it comes to a narrative. I was thinking, maybe this is a way you're talking about finding paths forward in this kind of narrative where maybe we don't agree on how Maduro fits into it. I think to your framing, we can agree this is a change event. This event happening allows massive and rapid change to take place in a certain region that might need it. Now, whether or not you think Maduro was trying to do that already and couldn't is up to you. But it certainly granted a lot of people narrative shielding, and Trump foremost among them, to be like, now let's see what happens with the cartels down there.
Listen, this is, you got to look at it like this. Was there any issues at the surface level publicly with Trump's administration in the end of his first administration, or even at the very beginning of this one? There wasn't. There was an issue with cartels. And that's why he came out with that executive order and told by Bondi, hey, designate these organizations as terrorist organizations. Why? Because he already knew this was going to unfold with Venezuela. So just because we're learning about this in the last couple of weeks, last couple of months, they've been strategizing this for, I would imagine, all the way through, Biden's administration. It's my personal belief, and I think most people would agree with it, that Trump had a working group that was at a very minimum strategic planners during the entire presidency of Biden. He's doing this. This is how, they weren't going to say, hey, we're going to wait till we win and then we'll develop plans. No, we're going to have all these different plans and contingencies in place. So depending on what we're handed when we get into office on January 20th of 2025, we make small modifications and we can hit the ground running. One of the things that proves that point is we learned, John Solomon had reported that Kash Patel had said, hey, all the way back in March, they had information already surrounding what was going to go down with Bolton and Comey. So we know, that'd be, I can tell you guys from a law enforcement perspective, that's a difficult investigation to have done in less than 60 days, if we're believing the timeline that he was given. So the only explanation to that is this has been planned for a long time. And, to look at the things that are happening to us, and I'll give you guys a modified real story, right? When I was working on a special enforcement team called a SESET team, we're kind of like the handyman. You handled all the things that patrol didn't have time to do. So you dealt with gangs, you dealt with graffiti, you dealt with like a lot of those things, right? But of course, on the SET team, we just want to deal with priority crimes, violent crimes, homicides, and gangs. But when the chief is getting, the commercial district, complaining to city council that, they're worried about transients and they're worried about this, well, that's where it's going to go. It's municipality. It's going to dictate. But when the chief says, yeah, well, if they were telling me that they were concerned with gangs, I could afford you guys more time to work with gangs. The little detective radar said, so that's what you need for us to do this. So what does that mean? That means while I'm going to the commercial district where these retail shop owners are to deal with the homeless people, I'm pointing out, look at all the graffiti you guys got right here on your businesses. Man, that's going to impact business. People aren't going to feel safe to come into this area when they see that graffiti there from that gang and that gang. And that graffiti and that graffiti, that's two gangs calling each other out. Like they're setting up a violent event to happen near your shop. Wait, what? What's going on? But what do I do about this? We got to deal with homelessness. But I mean, if you were to complain to city council, they'd probably want someone to deal with this gang problem. And you tell another shop owner and another shop owner. What you're doing is you're creating the court of public opinion in that commercial district to all see a unified problem to then demand city council to be like, you got to go deal with this. That comes full circle to the police chief, who then pulls us into his office and says, interesting. It's been about 2 weeks and I got this high demand to deal with graffiti and gangs in this area. And you're like, wow, what? What? Where'd this come from? What do you think?
That's exactly what you guys wanted to do.
So what do you think is happening to us as a population? We're being forced to see issues that have always deprived us of our sovereignty through ways we didn't see. So this stuff was always there. That graffiti was always there. The shop owner just didn't know how to look at it to recognize it as a threat. And so when you look at the American population, this stuff has always been there, but we're being trained on how to look at it to recognize, hey, this is an issue. And then that issue, once it trends, once it generates enough of the public engagement, we then put that pressure on our quote unquote representatives or President Trump directly, who then says, well, gosh, I guess I better do something about this. I have seen that play so much this year through Trump's administration, or because like you said, you recognize these things, you see where it's going. And that's what I've been doing this last year is I recognize it real quick and I'm like, oh, he's going to create the demand. And a perfect example of this is back in late February, early March. I told you guys can go back and find the post on X. I said, Trump is going to make them beg for the Epstein files. It's going to come. And here we are. And it's not because I got a crystal ball. It's just, I've been able to kind of read the way this is playing out. Right. And for instance, I don't know if you know this goes out. I haven't posted it in our Telegram chat yet. I will. But on November 29th of this year that just passed, I said exactly how this was going to go down with Maduro. So as soon as it happened, everybody started sending to me reposting. They're like, bro, you're fed. Now we know you're fed. And I'm like, no.
You know what's funny? I think a few of us got it in different, but we said it all differently, because there was a clip of Chris saying like, yeah, let's see what happens relative to Assad. In November, I was talking about the Assad template of saying, he got a cushy retirement in Moscow, and then the U.S. Department of Defense bombed ISIS right after the Russians pulled out of the area. So I called it Sovereign Alliance Maneuver Defense. And when Trump was about 2 months ago, he was saying, yeah, I might grant amnesty to Maduro so he can get over to the Qataris. And it's like, man, that's looking like a managed exit. But yeah, it's
100%.
It's even more cartoonish. Like you said, and people like you were catching that because of that forward recon, forward projection of narrative, which I don't think you're being that useful in an info war if you are not forward looking with the narratives. Otherwise, you're reacting to everything.
And that's what's so important to responsibility that people like you, me, a lot of our fellow coworkers, content creators at Badlands, we have a responsibility to do the research that we do, invest the time that we do, so we have the ability to be accurate with our forward thinking. Because you, the audience that's watching this podcast right now, when you see that there is a consistency and accuracy, not perfection, because nobody will be that, but when you see that there's a consistency and accuracy, then it gives you the ability to be like, you know what, there's credibility here at Badlands. They see this stuff in advance and they call that out. And why? Because at some point, you, the audience member, are going to not want to be reactive anymore. The question that everybody, well, not everybody, but the question that a lot of people always ask is, well, how can I be a part of this? Well, it's recognize what is your skill set and how can you apply that actively to helping our country reach its sovereignty? Because everybody has one. Some people, how to develop network, whatever it may be. And that all comes off of forward thinking, because you're going to want to align with people who could forward think and be accurate about it. Because that's the way you win a war. You don't want to go, and if you see a guy that's constantly wrong, right? Or someone, someone that's, they're going to play the safe road. They're never going to predict anything, and I hate using the word predict, but they're never going to at least try to make an assessment or an analysis of what's to come. They're just going to tell you what has happened and why what has happened. And why? Because there are a lot of people that want they want clarity, but clarity of past events without any instruction on what it's going to look like moving forward. All it's doing is delaying the inevitable. You're going to be a victim.
I like the way you just ended that, because that reminds me of something I said earlier in our Badlands chat. And I think it is a good bridge between me considering myself a Q person and my endless frustration with a lot of people who call themselves Q people. And the analogy I'd made is perfect fit to what you just said in terms of, what is this trying to get us toward? Basically, it's got to be forward looking, right? Not predictions, but I know it's hard to find another word. Projection, not prediction. And the analogy I'd made is a truther who doesn't get it to me, a trust the planner who doesn't get it to me, is like, let's say we both agree, a Badlander and like a just truther. We both agree that we are watching a movie. Like, that's a big ask. Not everybody agrees on that. But let's say that's the point of agreement between those two people. you can still be looking at this completely differently. Because let's say you go to a movie and it's Inception, like a trippy, type of thing, or Memento, early Christopher Nolan, Reversed. I don't know if you've seen that one, but like strange timeline narrative stuff that's going on there. And two guys come out of that movie. And the truther, when asked about the movie, starts telling you all the things he knew was going to happen. Well, I knew this was going to happen. And I knew that was going to happen. I knew this was going to happen. Well, how'd you know that? Well, I was reading leaks from the script, like hints from these insiders that knew how the script was being made. You see this in the movie industry. It really does happen. And that's kind of what the drops are to me. They're leaks about the script. I think that's a good thing. But the truther, or the dumb truther, just figures out what the plot of the movie is. And when you ask them what they thought of the movie, they repeat the plot to you. And my ideal conception of a Badlander, or somebody who understood the Q drops, comes out of the movie and tells you what the movie was about. What were its themes? What were the character motivations? What did it make you think about? What was it trying to teach you? Like, those are very different things. And that's what you made me think of. There is a way of engaging with the drops that is all about saying, okay, let me engage with the idea that a lot of what I'm watching, as much as it's hard to imagine, is somehow orchestrated or translated, and that ultimately the good guys, so to speak, have more control over this movie than the bad guys do. Let me engage with that. I think too many have gone down the rabbit hole of going, I predicted this because I looked at drop 447 and I matched it to this and I predicted this, without going the extra mile, which is what you've done for the last hour and what we try to do, which is everything you just laid out of, I call it mandate cultivation, but you said it a different way, but the same idea, motivating the people, right? What are they trying to get us to do with the plan? Okay, you predicted it, that's good, but what did that make you think about? Your mind starts going to, why should we be looking at Venezuela? What should I look into with regime change? Where are we trying to bring Venezuela? How does it compare to, as you said, how does it compare to Trump's national security strategy document he pointed out? He didn't just point out Western hemispheric defense and Monroe Doctrine. He said the enemy was the globalist superstate. Well, who's getting kicked out of Venezuela right now, right? Those are all, I think, the dot connecting that's useful to do when engaging with the movie idea. And I think the reason you see some people push back against the movie idea is because they're not pushing back against that idea. They're pushing back against people who are summarizing the movie plot without ever telling you that they have learned anything about geopolitics or anything like that, right? And I'll own myself here. And I always say I like to give myself a good lashing every now and again for paying my taxes like a bitch. How many of us would say, man, thank God we live in America where Donald Trump is in charge and the Patriots and the Sovereign Alliance and everything's good and we're in the golden age, and we file our fucking taxes to the deep administrative state. That either means it's one of two things. The reason you file your taxes, and there are only two reasons. You think you should, which is there's something wrong with you, you're retarded, or you are afraid not to. And if you are afraid not to, which is me, you do not believe that Donald Trump and the Patriots are anti-theft of the American people. Or you do not believe they have full control.
I'm
like,
glad.
And that's kind of
I'm so glad you articulated it that way. Because obviously we both agree on if you think it's the right thing, you're just retarded. So
yes,
we can dispose of that one because I think we all agree on that. But the other part, or it's because you're afraid. And that's important because that principle can be applied to so many different categories in this information war.
Yeah, and a lot of good people.
100%. So then the question becomes, what has to happen to make that person unafraid to make the move needed in that situation. Now, a lot would say, well, Trump just needs to end the Federal Reserve. Well, yeah, that's the simple way. There's no human change of behavior in that. That's just law and policy, which means again, we're a society that we got steered. We were told, okay, it's not okay, or it's okay now to not have to pay your taxes. The law's been changed. That's not a change of behavior. Right. You're just following what the new law is. So that means if all of a sudden another presidency comes in and says, hey, we're going to reinstitute this again, well, you're going to go right back to it because there wasn't a change of behavior. You're afraid to break that law. You're afraid of the consequence. So then what has to happen? You have to create a change of behavior, a change of mentality, a demand. Now, to do that, you have to build that. You have to build the courage, right? We have to build the courage to push beyond that fear. And that happens with little wins. And that is why you see the deep state pushing so hard against small victories. And a lot of people on the good side have become victim of this as well. You know, there's the famous line, well, nobody big's been arrested. But what you're ignoring is we've seen judges arrested. We've seen DAs fired. We're seeing attorneys being, we're seeing FBI agents that are being arrested, you know, at entry points of the US because we're seeing all these little wins that show that there is an attack on the virus, the government virus that's been put in this country. But as long as people can destroy the ability to see these wins, we live in this perpetual fear of what's going to happen. But if it's like war. Some of the missions they would give us, not to sound like, there's no way of, we're going to sound like crazy Marines. There were some battles they sent us to, and we're like, bro, that's cake. Like, we're going to go in there and like smoke everybody. Like, why don't you send like that army unit over there? Like we're beyond that conflict, right? And it was why? It was just to put a win there, and then another easy one. It was to give you 2-3 battles that were going to be easy wins, because what you didn't know was at the end of the week, you were going to get tasked with a mission that was going to scare the shit out of you.
Right.
You were going to be given a mission that they're going to tell you, we're expecting 13% casualties on this. And you start doing the math of how many people are in your platoon, and dying becomes very realistic. That fear's there. So what happens? There's confidence that's built, and there's wins that's built. And in information war, that is happening all the time. And I'm telling you, sometimes, and I fall victim to it too, we don't acknowledge the wins. And that's very important to conquering that fear you just talked about. Because I'll tell you what, BB, that fear that you described, you guys always know, I'm no AirPods in. I'm not in an X space right now. But in all these different spaces that I go in, and part of the reason I go into there is because I am trying to monitor the temperature of the people that we're trying to reach. And I'm trying to see, what is it that they have fears of? And I'll tell you, man, it's what you described there is probably one of the most difficult things in our community right now. But the second we conquer that, bro, that's a game changer.
Yeah, and I'm not even trying to black pill about it. I when I say I like to lash myself for it, I think we need to check ourselves with some honesty every now and again and say, we don't get to sit. I'm not saying we're as bad as the people who have it in Venezuela, right? I'm not saying that. But to your earlier point about people being like Venezuela bad or Maduro bad because the people of Venezuela are going through challenges. And it's like, okay, well, as Americans, we are robbed of half of our wealth, which means half of our time. And we have a MAGA America First president in his second public term publicly saying people shouldn't have to pay this tax, right? So now I totally agree with you from an end state perspective that I think there's mandate cultivation going on here. We had Marjorie Taylor Greene on Badlands with Shipwreck calling for a federal tax revolt long after G-Money. But this is why we need to praise people like the G-Moneys of the world, because we can all understand that it's reasonable to not want to put your family at risk, to not want to put your business at risk by going against a cartel like the IRS in the administrative state, while also understanding that from the perspective of a truther, a Q person, and a Badlander, there is some level of contradiction in there from people who say that like the plan is much further along than it is. It's my dog destroying my office. Because if it, basically you have to have it one of two ways. It either means that the Patriots are still taxing the shit out of you because they're trying to wake you up harder, which means they're stealing from you to wake you up, or they are allowing a powerful entity and a criminal network to steal from you. And again, I don't think it's an either or type of thing in reality. It's just that's the optics of it. And I think being honest about the opposite. What are you doing? My God, this mad lad.
I want love, Daddy.
Come on.
Nobody clip what I just said because I
You
understand
saw
how
a
that
lot
could
of
be
these.
weaponized against
Hey.
me right there. Oh,
Top, buddy.
what a good looking pup.
Are you?
What a
Are
good
you?
looking pup right there.
Want to wrestle? Came
I
in
need
here
to
to
go-
challenge me.
I need to
live
get
on
me a
air.
new big dog, man. I want a
Anyway,
big
it was
dog.
probably a good point. But yeah, I'm not I think my conclusion is lack of a conclusion. It's more that when you see a guy like all of us in this community, and I think it's ubiquitous in kind of MAGA and the truth community to be like taxation is theft. All libertarians say it, right? But there's like one G money out of 1,000 truthers that are like, so don't pay it. I don't. And it's kind of like the room gets quiet anytime that happens, including me, because we're all like, man, taxation is theft, rah rah, and Trump is totally going to end it. But to your point, it's like, so hold on, is us paying taxes or not paying taxes up to Donald Trump? Because I don't think that's what the plan was. I think the plan was for us to decide whether or not we pay taxes.
It's in law enforcement, we would call someone an FTE, failure to engage. And if that happens, you're not going to survive. You're more likely you're going to be fired, because most of the time that is not something you can out train someone from. If their mentality is that, it is. And I do remember one particular situation where I had an FTE, and I remember I asked him, "Why didn't you engage?" And his response was, "Well, I didn't know what to do." And I'm looking down at his waist. Like, you have an entire tool belt right there. You have a taser, a baton, a gun, bullets. You have all these tools that are there. And you couldn't figure out, and your hands being some as well. You couldn't figure out what you needed, what tool to deploy to engage in this fight. And because of that, luckily other people were there to accomplish that mission. But if they weren't there, either you would have got hurt, killed, or someone that's life's been entrusted to you, because that's why you have that badge on your chest, is going to be hurt and killed because you failed to engage. And people that merely do just trust the plan. Just trust the plan. That's a failure to engage. That means that this entire board provided you all these tools to learn how to become at minimum, an entry-level researcher, an entry-level detective. And all you can come up with is tell people that there's a plan. You can't facilitate a pathway for people to follow that plan to become engaged in saving their country. And I think this is one of the things that, General Flynn hammered very early on, at least early on to me when I started to listen to him, and it was local action has a national influence. Well, local action is what? It's engagement. Right. If you are engaging, there's going to be a response to that. Good or bad, if you engage, there's going to be a response. And I tell people all the time, BB, if we come to the end of the week, if we come to Sunday, I still consider Sundays the ending, not the beginning. I'm broken.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. I apologize.
That makes sense.
But if you come to Sunday night to where you're laying your head on the pillow and you don't feel it, depleted of energy, that means you kept stuff in the tank that should have been used that week to help facilitate this win towards the country. And that's what it comes down to. It's, the narrative, what this show's called, and my understanding of stories is whether I use my imagination to think of the tribal chief telling a story to the young Indians, or a Viking telling the story to young, Viking warriors, is you're trying to influence some type of mindset for something that they're probably going to encounter in their life, that they're, whether true or not true, there's a story embedded in their head that's going to offer them guidance on what to do. And when I look at, you know, the boards, everything that's just happened, you know, from 2016 to now, it's all these different things preparing us for this moment that we're coming to. And if people still have the mindset somebody's going to save us, then, you know, that's a dangerous mindset to have.
Yeah. I firmly agree with everything you said, and that's why I wanted to be clear that I'm not dooming out or blackpilling when I point out the taxation thing, but I think it's the most obvious, I'll say, hypocrisy among some. I think if you're honest about it and you're honest about your motivations and you're like, yeah, I pay taxes because I don't want the IRS to put a lien on my house and I've got a new kid, and like, yeah, I don't think that Donald Trump is going to save me from that right now. Now, maybe in a year or something like that. But it's just to make that point that you're making about that mandate cultivation, that kind of motivation of the story of saying, hey, I do think there's a reason Trump is bringing this up and trying to motivate people and being like, what do you think? You know, this is the feedback loop that Chris and John talk about a lot with Trump and the American people. He's bringing up the federal tax system for a reason. And I don't think it's because he's actually telling you, if as long as we get enough tariffs, we'll offset the federal taxes. I think he's using that as a translation vector of saying, of trying to spark that conversation. Wait a second. Why do I pay taxes in the first place? This community is a lot further ahead on that. Longtime truthers, libertarians are way ahead, obviously, in that conversation. But yeah, to your point about trust the planners, I think that's the most frustrating thing the last few years for some people in the info war, including a lot of people who are still Badlanders, is that rhetoric is getting called a doomer by people who only say trust the plan, and that is their level of engagement, or the people who say probably a coincidence. It's like, yeah, guys, nobody would still be here if we didn't think that there was a plan going on. You've proved that there was a plan going on every day for 10 years. As you said early in the show, the value add comes in helping people understand what the plan is and helping people engage, to your point, in the plan and in the forward motion of that. Now, if that's a tax revolt at some point in the near future, that's action, right? I'm not calling for it. I'm just saying there's people out there calling for it. And yeah, you know, you got to get to a certain point where maybe trusting the plan is more like, do we place trust? If patriots like Donald Trump and his administration, if they have the sort of power that we hope they have, and if the deep state and the administrative state has been weakened to the point where we hope it has or will be, then maybe what they are waiting on, to your point about these stories and what they're for, is for us to give them a reason, right? It's like, now, what would be really interesting to see is if there was a massive tax revolt in the US, what would Donald Trump's public rhetoric be about said tax revolt? And if Donald Trump's public rhetoric was supportive of the tax revolt, then how on earth is the commander-in-chief going to allow a criminal organization to levy penalties, criminal penalties onto the people engaged in the very thing he's endorsing? And we might be, this is why just trust the plan rhetoric I don't think is what Trump and them are looking for. I don't think they're looking for kinetic action. They're not looking for destabilization of society, anything like that. We're all strongly against that. But are they looking for some measure of civil disobedience that they can be like, okay, now you're showing us something here. You're showing us that you're kind of like, you're not just going to wait around for Trump to sign the right executive order. You're going to actually tell the administrative state to go fuck itself, which might be one of the points that Trump has been making in not so subtle ways.
It is absolutely my assessment that President Trump and team are waiting for something like that. And how do I know that, BB? Because Trump already set up the steps to make it okay. And what do I mean? He threw us an underhand pitch in fastball. And what was that underhand pitch? He showed us how you can fund the government and how you can fund programs within the government through revenue from tariffs, how he can give the military dividends for pay. None of that money came from the taxpayer. Why did he do that when he did it? Why did he do that before the tax revolt conversations came up? Because he was giving a conversation legitimacy. Because had he not done that, the thing everybody would have said is, well, how do we pay for everything? People that are dependent on SNAP or people are dependent on this, they wouldn't be able to do it. It is not a coincidence that we're seeing fraud spending in our government at a massive scale following Trump doing moves to show that we can fund the government other ways. That's absolutely strategic. Why? Because he's nudging us. Come on.
Yeah.
Quit being pussies. This is what he's saying. He's like, I'm bringing you guys to the conversation point. Have the conversation. It doesn't mean that we get to a point where there's no taxes. I don't think we can ever have that. But it does bring us to the point of where there's a tax that everybody considers reasonable that comes and we actually see the fruits of that tax. But what things have to happen for us to have that. You got to have transparency. You got to have a system that's completely audible. Like all these things have to exist. Right. But the demand for all those things come from us showing civil disobedience.
Right.
Because to go back to a point I made, and I was thinking about this while you're talking, I was like, I should say this so people understand what I mean by it's dangerous. If you're somebody that sticks to trust the plan and is waiting for someone else to do it, this is why it's dangerous. I'll tell you, hands down, good is always going to win. It's going to. That's the way humanity works. I subscribe to a higher power. Good's always going to win. The question is at what cost? And the inevitable is if we as an audience sit down, if we allow that fear to control us from moving past it, what does that mean we're really waiting for? It means we're waiting for a martyr. We're waiting for someone else that's going to take that step of courageousness to say, I'm not okay with this. We need to go beyond it. And then maybe they're arrested. Maybe they're hurt. Maybe they're killed. But what inevitably will happen is if everybody remains static and just an observer, we're finally going to get to a point where we get tired of seeing because here's the thing, the martyrs are going to be the people we like. The loss, the cost of the win is us losing people we like. It's we see maybe G Money's not loved by everybody, but he's loved by me. We see G Money thrown in a federal prison for 20 years for tax evasion. And then guess what? Man, if more of us would have stood up, maybe we all could have put the pressure on them to do something about this, and we didn't. And then all of a sudden we see another person. There comes a point where you get tired of losing good people. It hurts too much. It costs too much. And then you get involved. And at that point, we will win. But it came at a cost. Yeah. And what Trump and what this team is doing right now, why they've been training us the way they've been training us for so long, is to show us we can win if we make the moves to do that. And at the end of the day, we can lie to everybody, but we can't lie to ourselves. If you're remaining static, you are not a part of the solution. You are assisting the devastation that awaits us. It's one of two things.
I totally agree with that, and I think there's a truly subversive element that I was going to say within the truth community, but I don't think that they are real truthers. We talked about earlier earnest doomers and different opinions in the community, but then there are the people that try to retranslate what you just said into, you need to take action, you need to go do this, you need to get armed, you need to and I think that is not that's what they always try to steer you toward. That's what the media tries to form a caricature of Americans as MAGA as. But again, I think there's a reason civil disobedience works so well. And I totally agree with you that Trump is trying to cultivate that mandate. And think of it this way too. You used the word precedent a few times earlier. Imagine a public outcry, a large one, right? What's that saying about, you probably know this statistically, in terms of if you've got 3% of a population resisting rule, it is an ungovernable, especially kinetically. If you have 3% of the male population that has decided that they are not going to be occupied, you are not going to occupy that territory successfully. Let's say 3% of conservatives engaged in a tax revolt and were just extremely public about it in the age of social media and doing the rounds and making mass movements out of it. You're going to tell me that Trump and Patriots and Ghosts in the Machine aren't going to give that movement a massive boost and make it feel infinitely larger than it even is on an actual level? And then does that, I always use the term narrative shielding. I believe, I used to use that in terms of like patriots giving each other narrative shielding, sovereign alliance. Lately, something that's encouraging to me as we're talking about the golden age is us, to your point about action, us giving narrative shielding to Donald Trump and patriots, right? If we can make a big enough stink about what we want him to do, that is not dooming or not trusting the plan, which is what some of the Q people drive me insane about. When they actively stamp out people that are trying to say, I want you to do this, Donald Trump. And they're like, you're dooming, you don't trust the plan. It's like, motherfucker, Donald Trump is the tribune of the American people. He took that job stating, I work for you. I want to give power back to you. And you have people that have the nerve to say that we do not get to direct Donald Trump's actions. Who does? Who gets to direct the actions of the President of the United States, which is the only nation 100% founded on our leader working directly beneath us, under us? That is who he works for. That is who they work for. So instead of thinking of it as criticizing Donald Trump and the Patriots and not believing in a plan, I consider it giving them the narrative they need to forward that plan. And then imagine another regime, to your earlier point, trying to come in on the back of that cultivated and cemented mandate and trying to roll it back. Imagine we have years of no federal tax because Trump got that public mandate from the American people, and then another regime tries to roll it back. They'd be too scared to. And I think that's the position. Taxes is one example of this, but it's a big one. That Trump and company, Trump and Patriots do want us to be very vocal about what we want, even if that's against them at times, or saying like Trump, when he puts out some rhetoric about Ukraine, etc. I think sometimes those are market testers where he's saying like, push back on me now, right? We don't want to go to war with Russia, right, MAGA? And like 90% of MAGA is like, hey, Trump, like I like you, but chill, man. We don't want to go to war with Putin. And then you get that 10% of Mark Levinites that are like, I can't wait to kill us some Ruskies. So I think sometimes Trump gives us these beta tests. And ironically, if you only trust the plan, to your point, I think you're failing those beta tests that they're giving you.
Here's why it's so important that people have to follow what you're saying. And I navigate this very carefully. If like you said, the earnest people, right? If we're not the ones that are telling Trump, hey, this is the direction we want to go, and these are things we're not okay with, there is a group that's going to do it. And it's going to be the inauthentic, synthetic version that's pushed in there, the propaganda tool. That's gonna be the squeaky wheel that gets all the grease. They're going to have, whether it's a military industrial complex, an NGO, the deep state, the globalists, plug in whatever you want. They're going to be the ones that are going to seem like the loudest voice. And then inherently it's human nature to be, well, I want to be part of the winning team. So you're going to get people that are going to go side with something they really don't like, but they don't want to be cast out. They want to feel like they're part of the winning team. So this synthetic evolution of not being okay with what Trump's doing starts to look more organic because you're seeing real people subscribe to that idea. And all of a sudden, we're getting something we don't want. And so I would tell people, yes, we absolutely need to be able to address our president and question him. We have to be careful that while we do that, we're not falling into the trap of those that they're not doing it for the right reasons, but they're trying to subvert the presidency. They're trying to subvert the support from him. We've seen a lot of that. The only way we push back on that is to have the authentic people, like you said, actually say something. And yeah, it's crazy. I'm telling you, you guys can go use AI, use whatever you want. If enough of the population, and it's a very small percentage, it's less than 7%. I don't remember what the exact number it is, but it's less than 7%. So I'll just say 7% to be conservative. If 7% of the population all decided tomorrow this is what we want, and this is what we demand, the entire face of the nation would change in 3 days.
Yep.
That's how fast that would happen. But
and it's momentum based because that's how society works, right? I forget what they call it, the second follower phenomenon or the first follower phenomenon. Probably all seen that, right? One guy dancing in a field, people are looking at him, kind of making fun of him, but they're looking at each other. Once the second person starts dancing, a crowd forms because it's mandate cultivation right there. People like a winner, and winners are never part of the crowd. Like you don't start movements or forward movements by being part of the crowd.
I'm there with you, man. And I just hope and pray that people in the audience start realizing I can be a part of this and I can win. And the reason I hope for that so much, BB, is because I actually wagered my life on that. When to remind everybody, why am I even here? Right? I'm a normal guy who puts my pants on and t-shirt just like the rest of you guys. And on January 20th, 2021, I was sitting in a solitary confinement cell as a new president took office, and I had a choice to make. I could concede to what they wanted me to do, lie about myself and say I'm guilty and everything you say is true, so I could fall on the mercy of the most powerful and tyrannical government that exists on this planet, so I can try to get some resemblance of a life after that. And I said no, because of all the narratives and stories from my childhood to that moment, they had all prepped me for that moment. In that moment, I had a decision to make, BB. And I said, I am going to fight this with the understanding that we didn't have control over the courts. Right. As a matter of fact, as more time passed, we started to realize how corrupt our courts were. We started to realize how entrenched these Soros DAs were. And I had to come to a point where I had a new decision to make. Not just was I going to fight, but was I okay with the fact that I'm probably going to lose this fight because the fight is designed to cheat. And how do you win? How do you win on a chessboard that's compromised? And so then I said, I will be as loud and broad about my story that I can. So people who hear my story and like me, when they see the way this story is going to come to a conclusion, they're not going to be okay with it. They're going to be like, that guy was a good guy. He served his country, foreign and, and domestically. And look at what we did to him. And I'm not okay with that. And I'm going to get in this fight now. For me, that's what it was. I was willing not to be a martyr because I think that's more significant, but I was willing to be an early sacrifice. And not because I love the country so much, I do. It's just because I have little ones. And they don't stand a chance if we don't fight, and some of you, your kids are already adults, but you got grandbabies, some of you have nieces and nephews. If we're not willing to take personal sacrifice, that means we're putting that onus on them. That means the ones that we love most dear and cherish, the ones that we've been entrusted by our Creator to protect, we're saying, I'm too afraid to make the sacrifice, so chances are you're probably going to have to make that sacrifice. And if you don't like the way that sounds, especially if you're a man watching this show, then you got to do something about it. And like you said, it's not a call for violence or anything like that. You don't win an information war with kinetic violence. You just don't. Right. But, sometimes civil disobedience is part of that. Sometimes it's just being involved. There's a lot of avenues that this administration has opened up for us. And I'll tell you what, if so many of us were willing to make that sacrifice under a tyrannical government, right now we're sitting in the best possible position to inflict change on this country in a way that's still legal. You got to move forward. All you got to do is make one step more tomorrow than you did today. And if we do that in a big enough group, then all of a sudden we start to realize how many people are actually doing it. And I think right now, the rhetoric surrounding this tax revolt, I think Trump and them are measuring whether we're at that moment of, okay, they're ready to inflict change in this country. And I think if enough of us do it, we're actually going to see them facilitate the process.
First of all, fantastic. And I totally agree. I agree with that because, what happened to you, aside from, to your point, the ultimate sacrifice would be martyrdom, or sacrificing, your life in the line of duty, obviously. But your life was significantly upended by a corrupt legal system. The funny thing is, and again, as a cuck who pays my taxes, the reason I think the tax revolt idea has so much steam and potential, G Money would tell you, hey, it's the root of power. Ironically, to your earlier point, we're discovering that it's actually not, right? I think a lot of times when you first start getting into the truth community and the libertarianism, whatever it is, Austrian economics, Bitcoin, gold and silver, whatever, you're like, man, they steal from us and that's how they fund all these wars. Then you realize, like, no, they actually don't fund all the wars with that. They just print the money. So why are they taking mine? And the answer to that is much darker, right? The answer to that is some combination of to weaken you. That's something I don't see talked about a lot. I see the second point talked about a lot, which is to humiliate you, to subjugate you, to keep you as a subject, right? And I agree with that. But if they don't need it, what's the primary reason? I think it's to weaken you. Because, as anybody with a family like yourself knows, it's tough. My wife is taking a step back from work, and I'm trying to facilitate that move because we've got a little one and we don't want it to be the only one. And it's tough these days, and we don't want to send him to daycare, right? All these challenges that just normal people go through. And I'm like, don't worry, I'll buy the insurance. Well, I did, and damn, I guess I have 2 houses now. I don't live in 2 houses, but I have 2 houses in terms of that's what my bank account thinks. That is difficult, right? And when you're driving around as a new father and you're trying to facilitate, provide for your family more than you've ever provided for them before, and expand your spending in certain ways to do that, while your lifestyle actually diminishes as a result of that. I know these are just normal issues that so many people have. And then you're driving around and you go, 40 fucking percent, 30, 40%. And you start doing the math and you go, if I had that money that they stole from me, or that I sacrificed willingly to them as a bribe, that's what we're all doing, right? There's no difference between us paying the IRS and the people in Southie that paid Whitey Bulger and the Winter Hill Gang. Protection money. And what does protection money really mean? Protection from them. And everybody knows that that's what they're doing, but they kind of make the deal because it's easier. But yeah, you start driving around and you're going, man, if I had that extra 30, 40%, we'd be good. Quit your job, baby. Like, we're fine. And I think that's the case with a lot of men who make just a normal wage. If the government didn't take a third of it or more, they're okay. They'd be okay. And we'd have great families. We'd put a lot of daycares out of business. We'd put a lot of schools out of business. So there's a lot to it. But I totally agree with you in terms of, the other point I wanted to make is that, ironically, as important of a battle as that is, it's an easier battle than the type of thing you went through, and an easier battle than going to war, an easier battle than being a martyr or anything like that. Certainly an easier battle than a kinetic revolution, and a more useful one or viable one. And maybe that is the pathway that they are trying to nudge us and be like, hey, it's an ask. You're still taking some measure of risk, psychological risk, at least if you think there's going to be consequences. But you're not actually putting your life on the line, guys. Like, you're standing up to an administrative agency that you spend all of your time online saying Donald Trump is dismantling. So what kind of a risk do you think you're taking? And again, just so in case anybody thinks I'm being a hypocrite, I am saying this to myself as much as anybody else, because I'm the same as a lot of people. And there's a lot of people I know that don't do it, right? That are already ahead of me on that curve. But your last point there on fathers and what's it mean to protect your kids. It's funny. I was talking to Mrs. Bright recently about that, and I said I'd seen a quote a long time ago, and I think this is ubiquitous in various cultures. But it was mothers provide warmth, and fathers protect you from the cold. And I thought it was a great way of delineating that and saying they have tried to invert that. They have tried to keep fathers indoors, so to speak. Protect your family by not taking risks, right? That's how you can protect your family. But in truth, you need the alpha wolf that goes out into the woods. You need to go hunt. You need to go out and confront the other wolves in your territory, or they're going to get closer to your den every night, every moon, and eventually they're going to know that you're not going to test them. The closer they get to your den, you got to go out and venture out. And maybe that is, a little bit of what's going on with Trump and this mandate cultivation idea of saying, like, you got to go out into the cold a little bit and see what you find out there. And maybe we have your back, maybe we don't. But would that change whether or not it's the right thing to do?
I hear you on that one, man. The right thing to do. It's not too hard for us to figure what the right thing to do is. It's executing it, right? That's where the conflict comes. The cost of doing the right thing. Absolutely. To this point surrounding the tax revolt, and this is my speculation, right? Just kind of judging what we've been through, what I'm seeing, and why I think he's doing it and what's to come. I think that if this unfolds the way they think it's going to, and I think it is going to pick up momentum, I think this creates the conversation where people finally remember we're governed by consent. And if we can get the American population en masse to remember we're governed by consent, that's a big deal. That all of a sudden, how many people still call their congressmen and their president their leaders? And they're not. They're representatives. Distinctly different responsibilities and distinctly different titles. But a lot of people are still in that mindset of, well, our leaders, they're not our leaders.
That's a good point. That's just one of those language games that's good to try to reprogram ourselves, because it just becomes habitual, right? Trump's our leader. Like, yeah, you're right. Actually, if you're in the military, I suppose he is.
Yeah, he's your commander in chief.
But in the context of an American, no, he's not. He's your representative. He works for you.
It is.
So it's interesting.
And that kind of leads me to another concept that I've seen our community, really struggle with. And, I love movies. Like I probably like them too much, right? I know this isn't popular, but I absolutely love the way they ended Stranger Things. I agree with you and others on what they introduced. I was like, come on, did you have to? Outside of that, though, I think the strategy of what they did there was just crazy cool, right? And then I found myself like, man, I'm so bummed out that it's over. I really get attached to characters in movies.
Me too, man.
Then you'll agree with me. I feel like we get to enjoy movies more.
Oh yeah.
Because of that. And the one thing I've had to make sure that I constantly remind myself in this movie, this theater that we're engaged in, is I'm attached to one character in the movie, and that's the president. Every other character to me is expendable. I like a lot of characters. I like Cash. I like Bongino. But at the end of the day, they're all expendable. My confidence and momentum is not going to be affected by them turning out to be bad or bad guys turning out to be good, because I recognize these are all just characters on the board. They're just pieces, as long as that guy doesn't turn bad, because if he turns bad, then the whole strategy is going to change, and that's going to be dark as shit. Right. But other than that, I don't attach myself to all these other characters. I just see them as expendable, even the ones that I like. To the point on, the responsibility and the fatherhood, there's this video, and I have it saved in my playlist. I'll send it to you because I'm not going to be able to do as good a job as what this short video articulates. But this man shares this story. It's a motivational speaker guy. And he talks about how he's packing up his clothes to go on a business trip. And his little girl tells him, you know, where are you going? He's like, he explains to her, I'm going on a business trip again. And she's just like, but you're always going on these business trips. And he's just like, well, I got to pay the bills. I got to put food on the table. And then she makes this statement to him, BB. Now, from a father, this is probably going to hit you the way it hit me. She tells him, what if I eat less? Would you still have to go? So that was my response, bro. As soon as I heard that, I was like, oof. And then he goes on and he says this next thing, and it really impacted my mindset. Because I didn't know if I agreed with him, BB, But the more I thought about it, I was like, I get it. He says, most people will think in that story, I started to unpack my suitcase, told her, let's jump in the car, and we went off to the park. That's the direction most people would like to hear. He goes, but that ain't what happened. He goes, I kept packing and explained to her I needed to do this, and I explained why. He goes, because I needed to show her what sacrifice looks like to get what you really want in life. He goes, that was my responsibility. Not to comfort her in the moment, was really just comforting myself. My responsibility was to build character in her, to make her realize this is what the real world's like. And this is what real sacrifice looks like. And, when I look at where we're at, man, there's the things we want Trump to do and the things we want Trump to say. There's the things we want our podcasters to do and the things we want our podcasters to say. And then there's the things that need to be done so we all know exactly what truth looks like, what the cost looks like. I'll tell people this, and this is one of the reasons I respect Badlands so much, and I'm so honored to be a part of it. It would be very easy for us to turn into a hopium network.
Yeah.
It's
not hard to do. They're all over the place.
It would not be hard to just go and just, hey, everybody, don't worry about the struggle. Nasara Jasara, in 2 years, you're all going to have $1 billion in your bank.
Nothing can stop what's coming. Trust the plan.
Hey, doctor just told you got cancer and it's probably going to be fatal. Don't worry about it because Trump has these med beds back there. And as soon as this war is done, we're going to deliver them. And you know what? You're going to be healthy. That, hey, amputee, don't worry. We're going to build you legs. People love that shit. And because we all want hope, we want that. But the reality is, if you want to have that house and those cars, if you want to have these things, chances are you're going to have to work for it in some capacity, whatever that looks like. Yes, the community will be there to help you, but we have to find a way to become self-sufficient. And trust me, I say that from a very humble place because, to go back to my story, the government created a circumstance where I couldn't provide for myself. The government brought me to my knees as a man, because as a man, I was trained my entire life, 40 years, that if you go out there and work and provide for your family, you're doing your job. Well, what happens when the government puts this flag on your background and every job says, yeah, you're hired, you're hired, you're hired, you're hired. Here's bonuses. They run your background and say, sorry, we got to rescind the offer. What happens when you've done everything and the government says, we're not going to let you have a job. We're going to starve you and your we're going to make you watch your family suffer to put you into submission. Well, then you got to turn around and guess what? You got to put your pride aside and you got to tell the world, I need help. And I was very fortunate that a lot of people in this audience and in my audience came forward and said, hey, we're going to help you. We're going to help sustain you to get you into this fight. And that allowed me to put me in a position where I could become self-sufficient again. So I understand, I really understand what it's like to need help. But I also understand that you can't eternally live in that position. And if we're there as a community where we're sustaining ourselves right now because Trump and them are doing moves. But if we stay there and we don't become self-sufficient as we the people again, we don't make it, man. We don't, I believe in God and I trust in God, but God gave us 2 arms and 2 legs and 2 eyes and a mouth to go and affect change and to be part of the solution. And I don't know, man. I just feel like it's just, I feel like if we fail, that's on us. I see podcasters and content creators as the quarterbacks, right? When you lose a game, gotta look at the quarterback. Because when you,
Right.
because when you win the game, quarterback's like, yeah, I threw that pass.
Yeah.
If you're going to be celebrated in the wins, then you got to take the responsibility in the losses. And when we gauge where our community's at, we have to say, if our community is not where it's at, then where are we failing as the content creators, influencers, whatever title that's there? But then I'll also tell the audience, because I'm not going to alleviate them a responsibility.
Yeah, you motherfuckers.
If we're throwing the right passes as a quarterback, but y'all ain't blocking.
Yeah, you got the yips.
You know what I mean?
Get your shit together.
Get your shit together. This is a team effort, and BB, you put on these great shows with the narrative, and something you said in this show today that I hope the audience caught, and that's why I want to repeat it, because it was too important that I don't want people to miss it. If people watch movie and all they can do is regurgitate the plot, then they didn't understand it. If you guys are watching BB's show and other shows, and all you can do is go tell people what BB said, then you don't get it. But if you can interpret what his mission is through what he does in these shows or my shows or any of these shows, if you can do that, then you get it. And so I would tell, be honest with yourself. And if you're like, man, I'm not getting it, go back, rewatch, and then start getting it. Like, you have a responsibility as the viewer as well.
I appreciate that, man. And it's why I try to be really honest about not knowing what's going on. And I say many times that one of the things I'm most proud about of the Badlands creators who are here, who are left, and the audience, Badlanders, it's rare. There might be specific topics that people are really confident about, as they should be, right? You asked me about martial arts, and I'm confident. I'm going to go into that conversation confidently. You asked me why Tom Brady is way better than Aaron Rodgers, speaking of quarterbacks, and it's like, you're going to get dusted in that argument. But I think there's a humble kind of quality to people that ironically probably have a lot more to teach you than the people who are not. I think the Badlands audience and the Badlands zeitgeist is very confident in not having the answers. And I think that is a paradox that I really like, because it sort of is it's admitting, having that humble kind of nature to admit, or that learned, we've all been humbled through various circumstances, and some of them just in the info war, right? Getting embarrassed because you're like, man, I really thought this was going to happen, or I really thought this wasn't going to happen. 2021 might be an example for a lot of us who came up on the Q drops, etc. And then you reevaluate, right? The people who take the new information and don't just move the goalposts, but the people who really reevaluate their underlying premise and say, okay, I messed up here. You lose a fight. I always go back to fighting analogies. You lose a fight. Or do you say, oh, well, that guy got lucky? Whenever you hear that out of a fighter's mouth, you're like, this kid's not going to make it, right? You know that. If you've just watched fights long enough. The reason I bring up Aaron Rodgers is he was kind of like that throughout his career, right? Oh, the team and this and that and this and that. And then you hear other quarterbacks who are like, I really could have done better. I really didn't give my team the chance to win. Those guys have long careers. And I think just as people, it's like, man, that guy really got lucky, or I really got unlucky. And we've all done that at times, right? Life beats you down and you're like, Jesus, things, I can't catch a break. If I could just catch a break. And I think it either breaks you, to your earlier point about your experiences. For me, I've talked about on the show years ago, it was chronic pain, combination of nerve injuries and later Lyme disease that attacks nerves, which is not a good combination to have those two things. But, you get to that dark place and you either are like, everything's out to get me, I lost, I'm going to become a doomer, or, all right, I was a little naive at the way this battle was going to go, but how on earth is a battle going to be won if you don't rebuild yourself from that and say, like, all right, I don't see anybody else standing up here to do the shit that I'm always bitching about, so you got to become that person. Like I said earlier, you got to go out into the cold, because if you don't, there's a great quote. It's a strange quote from True Detective Season 1, when the two cops, have you ever seen that show?
I have now. I have.
You have. There's a quote in the middle of that show, kind of a little referenced quote, where Marty says to his partner, Rust, do you think I'm a bad man, Russ? And Russ says, to your point about the analogy of the father who said what the daughter needed to hear, Russ says, the world needs bad men, Marty. We keep the other bad men from the door. And he didn't coddle him. He didn't tell him he was a good man, and he didn't tell him he wasn't a bad one. But he just said, to me, I always took that as, you do things that other men don't do. And there might be negatives that come along with that. But if a society doesn't have those, then it's not going to survive very long. And if we don't have people like you doing what you do, not just at war, but in this new weird battle space where we don't even know what's going on, right? We have to open shows, or we choose to open shows that are supposed to encourage people and teach them by admitting that, like, hey, listen, guys, from the jump, we don't really know what's happening. But you want to watch us for the next few hours? We'll try to figure it out. And, I think it's great that we've cultivated an audience that really believes that. And I think it's because of that kind of honesty of people like you.
Oh, listen, if I say, hey, let's point us in the right direction, because the other thing too is if we isolate, one of the things I get asked a lot is, tell me who's bad, tell me who's good. Right. And there's a handful that I'm pretty confident in sharing my perspective. But again, I'm not God, so I can't say definitively, but I'll share like, hey, I'm confident enough that I'll say these particular, public figures, publicly. But it's what you're saying. If I put out information that this is definitively what's going to happen, and I'm wrong, what's the negative impact? How much did I exponentially make it worse by putting people in the wrong direction, versus if I say, hey, this is kind of what my assessment is, and this is kind of what I'm thinking, but just understand that this isn't definitive, this isn't concrete. Then people that go down that path are still going to be open to other possibilities. So if they come across information that says, well, it's more likely this, I didn't put blinders on them.
Yeah.
And I think that's very dangerous when, people put blinders. There's, the show I'll be doing later on tonight, the Q After Hours. We do this thing at the end of the show where we say, our craziest, fringe predictions, right? We say, you can't hold our feet to the fire. These are just some wild predictions of things that may happen, or things that we just want to see happen, right? That it's for fun and humor, but I think we should also, remember what you said. None of us are down in the bunkers of NORAD. None of us are in the vaults with Trump and team, and even those of us that have some pretty reliable sources, we don't know where they're getting their information from. And, part of operations is, and I'm open, trust me, every source that I have, and some of them know that I've had this conversation with them, is I know any moment they can be weaponized against me. They could have, because I had one of them, I won't even say he or she, I had one of them that was just like, hey man, I've been consistent with everything I've told you. I said, yeah, because that's exactly how the deep state would work, is have you be consistent for 2 or 3 years, so that one moment when they need you to get me to say something bad so I can go put it in front of 200,000 people, I fall for it. Ain't going to happen with me, And, I frustrated some people with that. I frustrated myself with that at times, because I'll see it put out and I'll be like, damn, that was legit, and I missed out on it. But then I say, hey, yeah, I might have missed out on it, but at least I know that I handled it the way I felt was responsible, and from there.
Well said, man. I just want to keep you for like another couple of minutes. I know you got to go to your next show. But I'll do, speaking of heel turns, I will do a heel turn right now. There's been too much humble talk on the show. In the audience, that we've been right about a lot of shit at Badlands. All right? That's why we're able to say that we're wrong about some stuff. And we can take some victory laps sometimes, We at least know the macro patterns that are going on. You see like Con Inc. influencers scrambling to be like, oh no, this doesn't fit with the thing I've been telling my audience for 2 years. How do I rejig everything? You haven't seen Ghost take any backward steps on his Israel stances. Mm-hmm. You haven't seen me take any backward steps on Russia. There's a lot of You haven't seen Chris Paul take any backward steps on elections being fake. And I think those are going to age quite well. I think a lot of Badlands narratives are going to age quite well. Digital 1776 from G Money is aging quite well, and that might just age quite well nationally. So, we're not humble about everything, and I think that's okay. So we were going to talk about these theaters, so I think we should start the show now. No, I'm just going to wrap it. I'm just going to get you with one take. The reason I decided not to go through theater by theater is I think we just had two great organic conversations that are all about the same themes. Instead of talking specifically about the Golden Age, I think these last two episodes with you have really been they kind of became about our approach to the Golden Age. And that's good. I think that's probably better and will age better. And maybe people will find more use in these than they would have otherwise. But I did have these theaters here. And just as a quick thing before you get out of here, I wonder if you just want to pick one of them that you think we are furthest ahead on as a movement from a narrative perspective. Like, where's the collective mind at? To refresh your memory, I'll go through a few of them. The war against the media. That was number one. The administrative state. The cartels or the banking cartels. You can say that's the same thing. The globalists. The war for justice. DOJ, that kind of stuff. Accountability. And the war for peace. Do any of those theaters jump out to you as being more meaningfully advanced than some of the other ones?
Absolutely. And it makes it easy because it's the first one you have up there, and it's the war on media.
I totally agree.
And I think that strategically it had to happen that way in order for us to have the understanding of all the other different theaters that we were going to be in. We had to get Trump, the white hats, whatever you want to call them, the good guys. They had to decouple us from our dependency on looking at media as the authority, looking at all these things as the authority. They had to get us in a mindset to look at these institutions that have been pushing propaganda. I mean, to me, it's media is the modern day MK Ultra. Like, they don't even have to plug people into these secret facilities anymore because they do it through TV, And so I think the one that we're probably more ahead on is the war on media. And I think it's, in part too, because right out of the gate, one of the first shots fired was at them from Trump. Fake news. That had probably the biggest ripple effect out of anything that he's done, because once people started to question the mainstream media, it started to take them and deprive them of the power they had. And coincidentally, you could argue that the deployment of Operation Q followed that. And I don't think that that's an accident. I think that was strategic. I think Trump knew that he was going to create a vacuum in where information came from. And if you're going to create a vacuum in something, the responsible thing is to create pathways and options for people once they realize this is no longer an authority of information to me. And I think one of the great things about Q, for those that approached the right way, was it was not telling you what to think. It was telling you to ask questions and research. And
absolutely,
it decentralized information, and I think that was one of the most important things that happened.
I totally agree with you, man. I would pick the same one for basically the same reasons. I also agree with you that the drops themselves worked as intended. Some people who use the drops maybe have forgotten that, right? That they do try to tell you how to think and what to think and what not to think, maybe more specifically. But that is not what the drops did. The drops used the Socratic method. I've said many times, besides what you said about the media, another way I'd frame it, my obsession with the narrative, Donald Trump, by declaring war on the media industrial complex, he de facto told you that the most important front in the war is the war of stories. Whoever controls the story controls the world. If you win the story, you win the world. And I think that's why it started that way. And I totally agree with you, Q following that. But he came down the escalator. He didn't call out the deep state when he came down the escalator. He didn't call out the pedophiles. He didn't call out the globalists. He called out the media because they tell the stories about reality. And That's the most important thing. Most important thing to lose, most important thing to win. I'm just going to read something as your outro here, a quick little thing, because I think it fits the theme of what we ended up talking about tonight. I'm sure a lot of people have heard the analogy of the drowning man. I'm sure you've heard this, and just go with it. This fits on the theme. A fellow was stuck on his rooftop in a flood. He was praying to God for help. Soon a man in a rowboat came by, and the fellow shouted to the man on the roof, "Jump in, I can save you." The stranded fellow shouted back, "No, it's okay. I'm praying to God, and he's going to save me." So the rowboat went on. Then a motorboat came by. The fellow in the motorboat shouted, "Jump in, I can save you." To this the stranded man said, "No thanks. I'm praying to God, he's going to save me. I have faith." So the motorboat went on. Then a helicopter came by, and the pilot shouted down, "Grab this rope, and I will lift you to safety." To this the stranded man again replied, "No thanks, I'm praying to God, he's going to save me. I have faith." So the helicopter reluctantly flew away. Soon the water rose above the rooftop, and the man drowned. He went to heaven, finally got his chance to discuss the whole situation with God, at which point he exclaimed, "I have faith in you, but you didn't save me. You let me drown, I don't understand why." To this God replied, "I sent you a rowboat, a motorboat, and a helicopter. What more did you expect?" It's an oldie but a goodie, whether you're religious or not, and I think it works perfectly with a lot of what you said tonight about action and that posture. You can believe there's a plan going on while also believing that you have a very active role in it. So I thank you for the time. I'm sorry for taking a little bit more of it both weeks. Watch Alpha on Q After Hours, and I'll have you back. As long as you want to come back, I'll definitely have you back.
I always enjoy these conversations. If you would allow me on my way out, to be cocky for a second, I put a post right there in your studio. Maybe I'm just lucky, but a few weeks ago, I had told Brad and Josh in Q After Hours, I said this is all going to kick off on Trump's Truth Social when it hits 11.3, and everybody knows 11.3, Law of War Manual, all these different decodes and conversations that have around it. And from time to time, I'd look at it and I'd be like, he's too far off. And lo and behold, on the day that he snatches up Maduro, bro.
That's
now,
great.
What's interesting is 2 days before this happened, because I was checking it periodically to see how close he was still about 80-some thousand people away. And
he had Elon queue up some bots. That's what that dinner was about.
I'm telling you, he did something. But on January 3rd, when Trump goes and captures Maduro, he hit 11.3. And so I just wanted to brag a little bit about that wild and crazy prediction to everybody. It's been an honor to be here and to have you and your audience this time, brother.
I allow some decodes, man. I don't think decodes are bad. It's unfortunate that some have tainted the decode space by absolutely everything being or rather, I should say, even when a lot of things are matches, the problem I've had with some people is that they seem to be implying that like that's what's going to wake people up, right? Like the normie on the couch that you can't even talk to about taxes is going to like get into that. I see it more the way you guys use it on Q After Hours and on what the hell?
DEF CON.
Jesus. You're the one? Yeah, I was like, DEF CON Zerk. It's because I was going to say Zerk, because that's what Chris and I always say, and I was like, Zerk. DEF CON Zerk, DEF CON 0. You guys are always talking about drops in terms of leading you into digs, which I've always liked that, right? Brad is like one of the OG diggers. It's like the matches, the decodes lead you into the digs. They're not the end of the dig. So keep on doing that. I think you guys are great. And I'm honored that you're following me up on these Sunday nights. So people will see you over there, and I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot, Alpha.
All right. God bless. Good night, everybody.
I removed myself. Look how professional I am. Jeez. I'll hang out with you guys for a bit. I'll get the rants. I'll get the boosts. Send you guys over to Q After Hours after this. Of course, I think I must have just got featured right as Alpha's leaving. I don't know if that's a coincidence. Somebody at Rumble was like, as soon as Alpha gets off the screen, we're going to feature the worst aspect of the show. Usually where Burning Bright gets a little tired, starts kind of rambling out incoherently, invents a straw man that I assign, whose opinions I assign to all of you in the audience, and then argue vehemently with that straw man until I don't remember who started the argument between me and the straw man I invented, but usually end up rounding into some kind of a point. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it could. We'll talk about a couple of things before we get out of here related to Maduro, related to Russians, and then we'll get out of here. I do know DEFCON Zerk. I call it Zerk every time, so I brain farted on that one. Let me grab these rants from the jump here so I don't leave them till the end. By the way, guys, please hit the thumbs up button if you have enjoyed the show tonight, had no internet issues. Alpha is a great guest. I think we had a couple of good conversations on the advent of the Golden Age and some of the path forward there. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you do, as always, want to check out more of that work, go on over to burningbright.substack.com. It's all free. The Wars That Were 2025 edition is the latest thing I wrote, where I go through all these theaters, kind of similar framing to what we talked about tonight, but a bit more in depth in the specific theaters of how I think things are actually going pretty well. Couple rants here. Tom Terrific 54 said, for $25, I think Hell has now been released. Could be. Crazed 34 said they're looking for a Macaulay Culkin. I saw this was about like mapping of these Somali daycare situations. A Craigslist ad seeking child actors for a daycare in Minneapolis has been discovered, with the poster requesting 20 children to act as clients while the state observes them to determine whether it's a legitimate daycare. Interesting. NC Cheney, Carl Huey on Newsmax, a former SEAL, is going mainstream with the tax revolt. May want to grab a clip. I think that's a solid plan. I did see that earlier. So yeah, it's getting out there, man. Tax revolt 2026 is gaining steam, and while we did not create it, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a channel outside of Badlands, especially G Money, that has been consistently talking about a tax revolt in the era of MAGA. So it's great to see that getting into much more mainstream rhetoric. And I'm really interested to see, once it gets boosted high enough, as Alpha was talking about tonight, how Trump wields that narrative or responds to that narrative. Because I think he's already doing a good job of it. He's certainly not trying to disabuse people of the notion that a tax revolt is necessary. So if it becomes more of an amplified movement in 2026, especially 250th, man, could you pick a better year? 250th? Like, shouldn't we feel a little bit gross, myself included, for appealing to the founding fathers all the time, whose movement was largely kicked off by and because of a tax revolt? And we're like, man, those founding fathers, bunch of great guys. That's what we think around these parts. We're not going to do anything that they did or believe in the things they believed in. But, you know, otherwise, we're just like them. So might be a good time to start amplifying that kind of stuff. Start gut checking ourselves so we don't continue to be pussy-ass bitches when it comes to the administrative state. James Klain, Happy New Year for $10. Thank you, James. And Julie JN, life's been crazy. I haven't been able to watch for a while. Good show. Thank you, Julie. Go back and watch part 1 last week. I think if you guys stitch these conversations together, we had a great 1-2. We sort of talked about an intro to the battle space last week, and tonight we really ended up talking about kind of a approach, InfoWar approach by Anons, by Q people, by truthers, by MAGA. And I think it's necessary to check ourselves on that every once in a while. We also had a couple of boosts. Luli Cal sent $25 over to the narrative. Thanks, BB and Alpha. Appreciate your perspective on what we're living through. Realistic without doom. I like that. I like that that you think that. And then Son of Kaczynski, I was raised to value message over messenger. Out of respect for the system, I'm open to a second opinion. I think I read that last week. So appreciate that when you guys support that way. Very much helps. Okay. Yeah, last little button on the approach to the info war and trust the plan, I think we had a good conversation on that tonight. I know a lot of people get sick of those conversations, but I think they're as necessary now as ever. And I saw it again this morning. You know, the Maduro news hits, and it's like people start going after Ghost or Chris Paul or any of us, being like, didn't you guys say that you thought Maduro was involved in some sovereign alliance stuff? Like, yeah, and we also said this was going to happen. So you're not exactly owning us by saying that. And then you got a lot of people who are trust the plan only, but don't actually understand what the plan is, or anything about geopolitics, or anything about the sovereign alliance, or anything about what's going on. But they say watch the water a lot on Twitter. So when Maduro gets rolled up, they're like, this is it. The whole op was to take down Maduro. And you go, oh, did you know that Maduro has been battling the globalist regime and Trump is now facilitating his exit, stage left, just like Vladimir Putin did with Bashir al-Assad 1 year ago, the same month, just about. So I think we had a good conversation about some of that. And I know everybody's heard most people have heard the drowning man little analog there, but I think it's a good one. And I think the plan, so to speak, was meant to be provoked and then cultivated within us. But ultimately, it must be actualized by us and then reflected back at us by quote-unquote patriots, representatives, leaders. That's kind of how I think of what the plan is. And there's a hell of a lot of people who just like to kind of get on a moral high horse and say they trusted the plan harder than you did, while forwarding no actual understanding or attempt to understand what is going on, what is being revealed, why these things are being revealed in the way they're being revealed. And that's why I really love this audience. You know, you go to a GART, you just hang out in the Badlands chat or whatever, any of our chat groups, Telegram, etc. And this audience tends to have conversations about, you know, the history of Venezuela, CIA regime change operations, what the Bushes were doing there, the Iran-Contra scandals, all that. A little bit more than a scandals. The origins of the cartels, the School of Americas, what Putin and Xi are doing with Maduro, what's their involvement, what is Trump really doing when it comes to the Monroe Doctrine, who is the consistent and across every battle space, every theater enemy in all of these deployments. Well, it seems to be the globalist regime. Who represents the globalist regime? Might be that person that they were propping up to take down Maduro that just got a Nobel Peace Prize on the back of a completely fake and made up story, who's funded directly by George Soros. And you have truthers that were cheering for her to depose Maduro, which is why it was amazing that Trump, in between talking about how evil and bad Maduro is, got a nice shot in on Hakuna Matata, as Chris Paul would say, Marina Corina Machado. Like, she ain't it. She ain't it, fam. I'm going to hit a couple quick ads before we get into our button topic, which is Maduro and some Russian shenanigans. First one up is very fitting. Our friends at Rise Attire. And you guys need some Sovereign Alliance merch. If you're ever going to make it into the club, this will get you in. What is the Sovereign Alliance? The Sovereign Alliance are a collection of leaders and countries that are aligned not in the vision for their countries, but against a vision that has been thrust upon them. I believe that the Sovereign Alliance is less a battle for something and more a battle against something. They are against globalism, collectivism. They are against the rules-based international order.
Sovereign Alliance, the latest addition to Badlands Rise merch, available now at badlandsmedia.tv/rise.
There are some, even within the Badlands, who would say, Burning Bright, you're a Russian propagandist. And to that I would say, thank you. It's very nice of you. I'm happy you said that. And we're also brought to you by ourselves. I don't want you to get scared during this ad, because it gets a little weird but I think it will convince you at the end that you need to join us in a way that you perhaps didn't expect when you started calling yourself a Badlander.
Get you some of that beard oil.
Now that I'm alone, got the close up. Do you see how awesome my beard looks right now?
I use the beard oil every single day. First thing. Comes out feeling all silky smooth. I take the dropper and I manually apply the oil directly to my mustache. Nice and, oh man, I love it. And then I do drops all throughout the hair, and then I just rub it all in. And then I top it off with the tallow stick on the face.
Dude, I feel like I have to grow a beard just to try this beard oil. It sounds
Do it, Jay.
amazing.
It's all from softdisclosure.com, and the best part about it is you'll be supporting Badlands Media, Annie from Willow and Farms, and basically 3 of Annie's neighbors. So that's 5 total American companies that you'd be supporting with one purchase.
I have been using the Soft Disclosure scentless beard oil every day after the shower. It looks unkempt, but it feels silky smooth. I want to look a little wild and unapproachable, but for the woman I trust, she'll be like, oh, it's actually kind of soft. He is approachable after all. Otherwise, stay away. And Soft Disclosure will help you too with that, if that's the very specific vibe you're going for.
That is very specific, yes.
You guys are supporting American businesses when you do that. It's absolutely incredible, and you get a great, great product.
Softdisclosure.com. It's good shit. My beard may seem unkempt, but that's just because I'm a dad. That's what we do now, okay? It's cold. Everything's wet and dry at the same time. There's salt everywhere, not just because I live near the ocean, but there's salt on the roads too. What am I supposed to trim up the beard? Have an electric razor rip my face apart? I just decided to persist. And the only thing keeping my face from falling apart is Soft Disclosure. Soft Disclosure. So, check it out. If you want your woman to love you again, to rekindle that spark, this is the only way to do it. I think that I stand by that. All right. Why do some of us have the correct opinion while everybody else has the incorrect opinion about Nicolas Maduro as one of our guys? Well, in the midst of various costume changes, as John and Chris were talking about last night, that are hilarious, several costume changes in one day, in the midst of the fact that Trump preceded this narrative while also preceding the amnesty that's likely going to come on the back of it, while many are tying themselves in rhetorical knots by advancing sovereign alliance rhetoric, which includes Russia and China, while then saying that Donald Trump is going after Maduro to defeat Russia and China without checking their underlying premises there, or the fact that that's a completely contradictory stance to hold. And while many are cheering, or were until Trump rug pulled them, cheering for an NGO-funded, George Soros-funded, Nobel Peace Prize winning, fake story-wielding whammon to be the new globalist leader of Venezuela, others have been trying to figure out what's actually going on down there. And since I'm a movie guy, since I'm a narrative guy, I also just thought it was pretty funny that Trump is being so performative about this extraction / very serious arrest and situation that he's even copying movie scenes. And people are going to say this is a stretch. You're absolutely right. But it's the first thing I thought of, and I will stand by it. So I want you to think about, for the next 30 seconds, what movie scene and situation does the parading of Nicolas Maduro through the streets of NYC make you think of? Where normies are even saying, Trump parades Maduro through New York with open doors in a van? Man, that is getting weird. And there was a lot more where this came from.
Good job, good job.
Now we're going to do a quick cut. A little darker, a little more dramatic.
Hey, you wait like everybody else, pal.
Like I said, a little darker.
What the hell is that? Obstruction ahead! Obstruction ahead! Damn it! All units divert down onto lower 5th. I repeat, exit down! Exit down!
Lower 5th will be like turkeys on Thanksgiving down there.
You get the point. So, ironically, I believe The Dark Knight is closer to the reality of what's going on here. This is the part where I go completely off the rails. And you guys are free to be wrong with your opinions of what's going on here. The correct opinion is that we're watching an actual that's more akin to The Dark Knight. The narrative is more akin to a weird 2026 social media dark comedy translation of an Elseworld version of The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight scene, by the way, perhaps the best audio fade in cinematic history during that overhead shot. That is the prisoner transport scene from The Dark Knight. Everybody knows it's happening. There's media attention on it. There's an undercurrent in the film that the media is trying to alert certain dark forces about the location of the prisoner transport. There's obviously a huge police presence. Some of them can be trusted. Some of them cannot be trusted. Who is the prisoner that is being transported in that scene? It's not Nicolas Maduro. It's not even a Venezuelan. It is Harvey Dent, the Attorney General of Gotham City, who is being imprisoned for admitting that he is the Batman, even though he is not the Batman. And to use a summary, in The Dark Knight, Harvey Dent turns himself in, claiming to be Batman, to draw out the Joker and allow the real Batman a chance to catch him. Harvey believes that if the city believes Batman is captured, the Joker will reveal himself for a final confrontation. Now, this doesn't go well for Harvey Dent, for anybody who has seen one of the greatest films, not just comic book films, one of the great films in American history. And if you are familiar with the extensive research of Badlands' own Ghost of Base Patrick Henry on his Geopolitics with Ghost show, or on the Badlands Substack, which I will plug in detail before we get out of here because it's important. We got some good shit coming up. Then I was certainly not familiar with the very interesting and labyrinthian lawfare that has been conducted both for and against Nicolas Maduro and against cartel leaders, non-governmental organizations, aka NGOs, both in the United States and in Europe, infamous energy companies, and how certain materials from Maduro ended up in the hands of the United States Department of Justice. And many people in this community believe in Rico Grande, there's a grand RICO conspiracy. Certainly there's a grand RICO conspiracy, right? We talk about it in the US all the time. That's targeted Donald Trump and by extension the American people. But most of us believe that there's a global version of that RICO conspiracy. Some of us also believe that the RICO investigation and justice campaign that many in the truth community discuss when it comes to the United States and Donald Trump against the US deep state players, that there is an international sovereign alliance version of that. And Ghost would tell you that Nicolas Maduro, by hook or by crook, is a massive part of that. Now, if you want to stretch the Dark Knight analogy further, one wonders, will we see a Joker analog kind of come out to fill the vacuum left in the wake of Maduro's exit? Right now we've got a VP in line, Maduro's VP. But are we going to get a Corina Machado? Do a double regime change? Does the deep state go forward with a double regime change? I mean, I'm not sure. But it's entirely possible. So anyway, I thought that was kind of a stupid point I was going to make after making other good points. But I decided that it's not a stupid point. And I think the war is a story and the story is a war. And I think stories follow certain templates. Yes, the Trump is Batman memes. I've been writing about that for years. I absolutely think it's a lot more literal than a lot of people believe. And I choose to think that the armored car transporting a criminal informant throughout Gotham City, which would be New York City in our real world analog, while the actual underworld hunts that man, while he is in protective custody of Gotham City, I think, I don't know. I think there's something there. I think we're cooking a little bit with that. And, there's other tells as well. You guys have probably been seeing this float around out there. Before we get out of here, some rapid fire. Headlines are reverse indicators, guys. Use the headlines as reverse indicators of what the media establishment and the globalist regime they work for really think about the situation. The New York Times, how Trump fixed on a Maduro loyalist as Venezuela's new leader. Nicolas Maduro balked at a gilded exile. U.S. officials saw a more pliant option in his vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, known for stabilizing Venezuela's economy. So they're saying that Maduro's administration was stabilizing the economy, but it was his VP that was doing it. It wasn't him. They also claim it was one dance move too many for Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro. Maduro in late December rejected an ultimatum from Trump to leave office and go into a gilded exile in Turkey, according to several Americans and Venezuelans involved in transition talks. Oh, that's so interesting. Transition talks. I thought this was a hostile takeover. Transition talks? What? You're going to tell me this was a mutually agreed situation? This week, he was back on stage brushing off the latest U.S. escalation by bouncing to an electronic beat while his recorded voice repeated in English, "No crazy war." Mr. Maduro's regular public dancing and other displays of... Sorry, guys. Let me be more serious. Let me read it like Fox News would read it. Mr. Maduro's regular public dancing and other displays of nonchalance in recent weeks helped persuade some of Trump team that the Venezuelan president was mocking them. So, this is very serious. I'm sorry for implying that this was not serious. I'm sorry for implying that it was not Nicolas Maduro's dancing that prompted a very real regime change operation and the reenactment of a scene from The Dark Knight. So, sorry for implying that. Oh, and there's this one. Just to keep the charade going. From The Atlantic, Trump threatens Venezuela's new leader with a fate worse than Maduro's. So this is the management that Trump is talking about. I would argue it's sovereign alliance management. What's her name? Delcy Rodriguez. She's going to be, acting as our interim assistant to the regional manager of Venezuela. Trump says if she doesn't do what's right, she's going to pay a very big price, probably bigger than Maduro. She's going to have, as Chris said in our private chat earlier, she's going to have 7 wardrobe changes in the first 12 hours instead of just like 3 or 4. And even more photo ops, and probably like a scene from The Dark Knight Rises or something. Something more embarrassing. I like to pick on this guy for some reason. Because I don't like to just hit the mainstream media. I like to hit the people who think that they're not retarded. From Andrew Korobko. Regime tweaking, not regime change, is what the U.S. just achieved in Venezuela. So people who are pro the regime change are confused because it doesn't really seem like Trump changed a regime over. It seems like he kind of just kept the same one in place, but created an extremely dramatic narrative on the way to doing that. And then others in the sort of independent media, they also think that Trump didn't regime change. They want the regime change. And they're like, he just tweaked it. What, this isn't anything. And yes, I know, Bastiat, that what we're watching is so much bigger than Batman. I'm using it as an analog because it works. I also think it's interesting. Trump and Musk grabbed dinner. So another thing, and we weren't the only ones who said this, but man, do you guys remember how dramatic it was of everybody talking about the feud? Everybody, not people in what we would call the info war, but certainly people in the truth community told you from day one that the Trump-Elon feud was kayfabe and that they were going to be best friends again, lickety-split. And we saw more indications of this months ago. But, here's your latest. Social media gets taken over by the latest narrative / actual deployment out of the Trump administration. Who owns the biggest information platform in the world? That's Elon Musk, largest DoD contractor over the last 10 years under Donald Trump, and now in control of that narrative dissemination weapon, narrative projection and amplification weapon, and are grabbing dinner after the Maduro arrest. And the last little tidbit I want to end on is by our friend Dmitry Medvedev, who I referenced earlier in the show. Former Russian president, probably the B or the C to Vladimir Putin's A. Dmitry Medvedev, I call him the bad cop in the Russian narrative. He's also usually saying the most true things. Russia's Medvedev calls Trump's actions in Venezuela illegal, but say they have a certain consistency. And I will read you guys the direct statement, which is long. Or I'll at least read part of it. Okay. How do I... You know what? I think there's a way I can do this. There's a way I can do this. So bear with me. Hold for processing. I might not read all of it. I might just read select little sections from it. I think it's very telling, and it's worth amplifying. All right. Sorry to whoever just turned this on and was like, what are you doing? Important stuff, my hypothetical guy. All right. Whoops, that's the second one. That's the first one. Here we go. So Dmitry Medvedev did an interview with TASS, and he then posted his own answers, like his longer answers to that interview. So, question, what's your take on the European reaction to developments in Venezuela and the arguments citing Maduro's alleged lack of legitimacy? Does it mean, in your opinion, that the U.S. could well take similar action against Zelensky if he refuses to make a deal with Trump? Again, consider this through the lens of the sovereign alliance between Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping, and the idea of managed optical regime changes that result in sovereign realignment while expelling globalist interests from the region. Medvedev says Europe's reaction to what's going on in Venezuela is a classic example of double standards. The cowardly and dependent Euro degenerates are rushing to lick Washington's boots, which is why they're blabbering about the mythical support of democracy in Venezuela. They're in a hurry to justify an egregious violation of international law. So many would not like that, right? Then he says, talks about Maduro's illegitimacy are nonsensical. For some reason, the same European idiots never raised the issue before. From this perspective, however, the Kyiv clown should be on the lookout. His mandate expired long ago, which is recognized fact that hasn't really been contested by anyone in Europe. There's no legitimate government or president in Ukraine. His removal is something that could happen in the near future. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but anything could happen, especially given the fact that the junkie buffoon and his ragtag gang are prime suspects for a drug investigation. After the Maduro precedent, the Yanks could use the same tactic against the Banderite bastards. It would be more justified anyway. Is Medvedev actually going against the Trump narrative with Maduro in this whole stage play? Or is he using it as a preview for the next one? Something to think about. Could we expect a similar U.S. operation against, say, Greenland? Should the Danish authorities be worried? Could they go after European countries whose interests do not align with the American ones? Could you imagine, at least as one of your impossible predictions, a special operation like that against the leader of Germany, for example? So this is the question. The answer from Medvedev: the kidnapping of an elected head of state is an obvious violation of international legal norms. Any peaceful and democratic transfer of power in Venezuela is out of the question right now. The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and other obnoxious hags like her, I call her a harpy. So Medvedev, I think, might be reading some Burning Bright. I call her a harpy. My readers know. So a hag, that's close. Shouldn't be engaging in gaslighting again. Aggression is aggression, period. What's more, if it happens to a stronger country than Venezuela, such actions would lead to an unequivocal declaration of war. The events in Caracas have clearly demonstrated that no country which in some way has caused the displeasure of the U.S. can feel safe. Denmark and its Greenland are definitely in the crosshairs. At the same time, we must admit Trump's actions, while clearly illegal, have been somewhat consistent. The American president and his team have been steadfast in fighting for their country's national interests, including political and economic ones. It didn't begin with Trump. Old Uncle Sammy has always been keen to grab other people's stuff. So then there's good. I said he was bad cop, right? So he found himself swaying into good cop, so he pivoted real quick. Just remember the cynical, vile Biddy Albright, who had no qualms about bemoaning the injustice of Russia possessing such a wealth of natural reserves, hence the desire to redistribute them. It was with the same rare earth minerals in Ukraine, which Trump seized upon immediately. Maduro has said it time and again that the real objective of the current American administration is to pocket Venezuelan oil and other materials, which Trump doesn't even try to hide. What can I say? It's a case of lex fortissimum, or the law of the strongest. Our comrades from good old Yankistan should know this. They no longer even have a formal pretext to blame our country for anything. Meanwhile, the capture of Maduro and his spouse will add fuel to the flames of bitter hatred of the gringos felt across Latin America. One last thing, the capture of, say, neo-Nazi Mertz could be a fabulous twist in the plot of this campy soap opera. Few things can surprise us anymore. It wouldn't be entirely unrealistic either. Mertz has done enough to be prosecuted even in Germany, so nobody would feel sorry for him, given the folks in Germany are suffering for nothing. So the other ones are not quite as on the level as that one, but man, you can read that as Trump bashing if you want, or you can read that as one of the core pillars of the Sovereign Alliance, just saying, hey, this is a soap opera, and now this has set, this Maduro extraction and arrest and very real regime change operation has set both narrative and actual precedent for the same situation for American, aka sovereign interests, to be forwarded across the global battle space. And he gives you a few potential examples. And this is why ultimately, while I have my opinion of Maduro as potentially an our guy, as many others have the opposite opinion, the net effects refrain always avails us well when it comes to diagnosing, analyzing the narrative. The end result, delivered from Medvedev's mouth himself, is that narrative and actual precedent has now been set to repeat this template across the global battle space. And what was Trump's New Monroe Doctrine? The Dunroe Doctrine? It wasn't just about hemispheric defense in the West, regions of responsibility. It was about undermining and drawing a line of demarcation between sovereign acting nations and the globalist superstate that is being dismantled. And this is the funny thing, where people that think Maduro is the globalist and that's the dismantling need to do a little bit more research into his history. Just like Bashir al-Assad in Syria, who's now taking up permanent residence, protected residence in Moscow, and Maduro has been offered that in both Moscow and Qatar. The latter is an open ally now, a friend of the United States under Donald Trump. The former, Moscow, I believe will be disclosed that way, and that they already very much are on an actual level. He was offered a retirement plan from the Sovereign Alliance, and he's probably going to take it after whatever he does here. And I do agree as well, while I think it's ridiculous to believe that the reason American elections are legitimate is because Venezuelans have been stealing them, I do believe that some of the narrative of mass election fraud and systemic election fraud in the United States is probably going to be translated through whatever comes out of this Maduro clown show. Try to enjoy it for what it is. Think what you want about it. Net effects, though, it is exposing a lot of people who don't do any critical thinking. And, it's kind of forcing people to pick a first principles line on one way or the other. Sure, we have not heard the last of it. That's all I've got for you tonight, guys. But before I get out of here, I say it all the time. Substack is one of the best ways you can support us. You can support me individually at burningbright.substack.com. But this is about the Badlands Substack. I am the editor over there, the sort of editor-in-chief. Ash in America and Ghost of Base Patrick Henry are my two main team members over there, co-leads. We are doing things differently entering 2026. We just started it up, the Badlands Brief. The Badlands, that's no longer the news brief. We took a word out of there. It's the Badlands Brief. Is got a new look and it's got a new format. It's still the brief you love, where we essentially comment on the previous days, the biggest stories of the previous days. Myself, Ash, and Ghost take turns leading the brief and giving our takes and written comments on some of the biggest stories of the day. It's kind of a great primer. You wake up Tuesday morning, you get a rundown on the big narratives from Monday. Some of them you're very well aware of. There's usually 2 or 3 that you were not aware of, that one of the 3 of us took a keen interest in, because we're all, retarded in various ways. So we hyper-focus on things. You get to see that hyper-focus in written form, a little bit different than the podcasts. And we're transitioning a bit in 2026 away from posting like a CNN link and then commenting on it. And we're translating these things more into macro topics of the day. And so far, early response has been very positive. We changed the formatting a little bit. We think people are going to enjoy it. The Badlands Brief is free. Badlands.substack.com. It's free. Subscribe to it. It'll hit your inbox Monday through Friday. The other thing we are doing, starting, I believe, this week, we're going to try to launch it on Saturday. If you are a subscriber to the Badlands Substack, you will be getting the Badlands Blitz, which is going to be a rotation between myself, Ash, and Ghost. It's going to be a show. I think we're going to record it. I think we're going to film it. So I think it will be video and audio is probably what we're going to go with. Just like a Badlands show. It's not going to be on the Rumble channel. We're actually going to do it for our Substack subscribers. It is also going to be free. So that's going to hit your inbox on Saturdays. There's kind of a void on Saturday. And we think that's a great day of the week to kind of do a recap of the week. So if the brief is a daily edition, the Blitz is going to be a weekly rapid fire. And one of the funniest things is going to be, can Ghost and I, when we do a show, actually get the Blitz out in 60 minutes? Obviously, that seems impossible, even to me. So we're going to try, though. So it's going to be a quick hit. And I think that'll give us, we'll start to build this kind of cool domino effect. And as the blitzes come out, I think we'll be able to see that even from Monday to Friday, how quickly the story cycle changes from those topics on Monday and Tuesday to Friday. And, I think that'll be interesting even for us to track and for you guys to track as well. Like, hey, wait, what were we talking about on Monday in the community? Are we still talking about it at the end of the week? And what has changed in quick order? Because we can all get very focused on the present, the primordial present, as I call it in my writing, with all my alliteration that I know you guys love. We get really focused on that. It's hard not to be, because you gotta feel like you gotta figure out what's going on every day. So I think this will be good for us. This will be good for you guys. Badlands.substack.com. All that stuff is free. But of course, part of why we are doing this is to give back to the Substack subscribers, because we have a whole sub community of the Badlands audience that's been reading and supporting us over there for literally years. We're going to try to incorporate their comments, in the Blitz as well, and do like an audience section there. So jump into the comments section there. There's a lot of great people there, great accounts there who are not usually in the Rumble chats, kind of a separate audience. There's only a little bit of crossover. We want more of that crossover. So go check it out, subscribe to it. If you like it after a few weeks or months, consider a paid subscription. You don't have to. You can cancel at any time, but we do pay for the time spent on the Substack, and that'll help us justify spending the time to keep doing it. So we're going to do a trial run here, see how the new brief goes, see how the Blitz goes, and see how you guys like it. And I promise it's not just repetitive content that you're going to see on our shows anyway. When we write a little differently, we comment a little differently, and, we'll see how it goes. So, do it. Don't be a bitch. Otherwise, I think we've done enough tonight. I think we figured everything out. Hope you guys enjoyed. Please hit the thumbs up button. Please share the show. Share part 1 as well from last week if you want to know kind of how the Golden Age is going from the perspective of myself and Alpha. Don't quite know yet who my guest is for next Sunday night, but the narrative will return. I saw the Steelers won tonight. Congrats to the Steelers fans. I talked some shit about Aaron Rodgers, but hey, a win's a win's a win. Football ain't easy. So check it out. Check out the narrative next week, 9 p.m. Eastern. Watch the boys at Q After Hours coming up right now. I will raid you over there for anybody that is still hanging out. Otherwise, as I always say, the war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly. See you guys next week.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Merlin?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Renly commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. Were you rested in your cradle of power? You were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we will have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all. You will bring me. Captain Armor, I do not know what strength is in my blood. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people fail. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.